When Elena Varga signed her name on a marriage certificate to save her father from certain death, she became property of the most feared man in the city, Adrian Volkov, a crime magnate who collects debts in blood. Their wedding was a transaction, their mansion, a prison of marble and silence. She lives on the third floor. He rules from the second. They are husband and wife in name only, strangers trapped in a gilded performance where love is forbidden and escape seems impossible. But when one reckless night shatters every rule between them, Elena discovers she's carrying a secret that will either destroy them both or force the ice to finally break. If you want to see how a loveless contract transforms into something neither of them expected, stay with me until the end. And don't forget to hit that like button and comment with your city so I can see how far this story travels. So, the courthouse smelled of old paper and broken promises. Elena Varga sat on a wooden bench outside Judge Morrison's chambers, her hands folded so tightly in her lap that her knuckles had gone white. She wore the only decent dress she owned, a simple gray sheath that had seen her through job interviews and funerals, occasions where one needed to appear respectable while disappearing into the background. Today it would see her through a wedding, if it could even be called that. Through the frosted glass window of the chamber door, she could see shadows moving. Her father, Gregor, stood hunched before a broad-shouldered silhouette that could only belong to Adrian Volkov. Even in shadow, Volkov's presence dominated the room. Elena had never met the man, had only heard whispers of his name spoken in the same hushed tones people used when discussing natural disasters or terminal diagnoses. Adrian Volkov, the king of the city's underworld, a man who turned neighborhoods into empires and enemies into cautionary tales, and in approximately 10 minutes, he would become her husband. The chamber door opened. Her father emerged first, his face gray as ash, eyes refusing to meet hers. Behind him came a man in an immaculate charcoal suit, and Elena's breath caught despite herself. Adrian Volkov was not what she expected. The rumors painted him as a monster, something barely human. But the man who stood before her possessed a cold, precise beauty. Dark hair swept back from a face of sharp angles and harder edges, eyes the color of winter storms, a mouth that looked like it had forgotten how to smile years ago. He was perhaps 35, though something ancient lived behind his gaze, something that had seen too much and felt too little. He looked at her the way one might appraise a piece of furniture. Miss Varga. His voice was smooth, educated, utterly devoid of warmth. Shall we proceed? It wasn't a question. Judge Morrison performed the ceremony with bureaucratic efficiency, rattling through the legal language as if marrying a terrified young woman to a crime lord was just another Tuesday afternoon. Elena heard herself respond when prompted, her voice sounding distant and unfamiliar. She watched her hand, pale, trembling slightly, as Adrian slid a platinum band onto her finger. The ring was beautiful and cold, like everything else about this moment. When the judge pronounced them married, Adrian didn't kiss her. He simply signed the certificate with a fountain pen that probably cost more than her annual rent, then waited while she added her own signature below his. Elena Varga became Elena Volkov with the scratch of a pen. "The car is waiting," Adrian said, already turning toward the door. Her father caught her arm as she stood, his grip desperate. "Lena, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. If there had been any other way." There wasn't. She pulled free gently, too numb for anger. Her father had made his choices, gambling debts that spiraled into loans from dangerous men, promises he couldn't keep, interest that compounded until the amount owed could never be repaid in money. Only in flesh. Only in her. "I'll find a way to fix this," Gregor whispered. "I'll get you out." But they both knew he wouldn't. Her father was a dreamer, always had been. He dreamed at card tables and roulette wheels, dreamed of big scores that never materialized. Now Elena would pay for those dreams with the rest of her life. She followed Adrian Volkov out of the courthouse into the brittle sunshine of an October afternoon. A black Mercedes waited at the curb, so pristine it looked like it had never touched actual road. A driver in a dark suit held the rear door open, his face professionally blank. Adrian gestured for her to enter first. She slid across leather seats that smelled of expensive conditioning treatments, and something else. Something masculine and faintly cedar-scented that must be his cologne. He settled beside her, maintaining a careful distance, and the driver closed them into climate-controlled silence. The car pulled smoothly into traffic. Elena stared out the window as the courthouse receded behind them, taking with it the last remnants of her old life. She had spent 28 years building something modest but her own, a career as a botanical illustrator, a small apartment in a neighborhood where the rent was affordable if you didn't mind the noise, a quiet existence, painting flowers for textbooks and gardening magazines. It wasn't glamorous, but it was hers. Now she owned nothing, not even her own name. "You'll find the estate comfortable," Adrian said, breaking the silence. He hadn't looked at her once since they entered the car, his attention fixed on his phone as he scrolled through messages. "Mrs. Chen, the housekeeper, will show you to your quarters and explain the household routine." "My quarters?" Elena kept her voice steady despite the ice spreading through her chest. "The third floor, east wing." Still not looking at her. "You'll have privacy. I occupy the second floor, west wing. Our paths need not cross except when appearances require it." Of course. This was a business arrangement, nothing more. She was a solution to a problem, whatever problem a man like Adrian Volkov needed a wife to solve. "What exactly do you need from me?" The question emerged sharper than she intended. "Why marriage? Why not just keep me as collateral some other way?" Finally, he looked at her. Those winter storm eyes assessed her with the same detached interest he might show a stock report. There are certain business associates who prefer to deal with family men. They find it reassuring, evidence of stability, investment in the future, ties to conventional society. I need their cooperation for several ventures currently in development. So I'm a prop. You're a wife. On paper and in public. His gaze returned to his phone. Beyond that, I have no expectations. The ice in Elena's chest expanded. Somehow this was worse than if he'd demanded something from her. Affection, obedience, her body. Those she could have refused, fought against, maintained some sense of self in opposition. But this indifference? She was less than a prisoner. She was scenery. The Mercedes turned onto a private road that wound through gates Elena hadn't even seen open. Security so seamless it might as well have been invisible. Trees lined the drive, their autumn leaves gold and amber in the slanting light. And then the house came into view. Mansion seemed inadequate. Estate felt closer. It sprawled across manicured grounds like a monument to wealth so vast it became abstract. Modern architecture softened by classical elements, all glass and pale stone, 3 stories of carefully designed luxury. Beautiful. Intimidating. Cold. Her new prison. The driver opened her door. Elena stepped out onto cobblestones that probably cost more per square foot than most people's homes. Adrian was already striding toward the entrance, where an elegant woman in her 50s waited, her silver-streaked hair pulled into a neat bun. "Mrs. Chen," Adrian said, not slowing his pace, "this is my wife, Elena. Please show her to the 3rd floor and ensure she has everything she needs." "Of course, Mr. Volkov." He disappeared into the house without another word, without a backward glance. Elena stood frozen on the cobblestones, a stranger in an evening dress at 2 in the afternoon, a wife abandoned by her groom minutes after the ceremony. Mrs. Chen's expression softened almost imperceptibly. "Come, Mrs. Volkov, let me show you your rooms." The interior matched the exterior, beautiful, expensive, utterly impersonal. Marble floors in the entrance hall, a curved staircase with wrought iron railings, art on the walls that Elena's trained eye recognized as original works, not prints. Wealth that didn't need to announce itself because it was simply assumed. They climbed to the 3rd floor, Mrs. Chen maintaining a steady narration about meal times, household staff schedules, which rooms were off limits, and which Elena could use freely. The words washed over her in a meaningless tide. Elena was too busy cataloging exits, counting windows, noting that her floor felt separate from the rest of the house, isolated. "These are your quarters," Mrs. Chen said, opening double doors. The suite was larger than Elena's entire former apartment. A sitting room flowed into a bedroom with a king-size bed that could comfortably sleep 4. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the grounds. An ensuite bathroom featured a soaking tub and a shower with enough jets and fixtures to require an instruction manual. A walk-in closet stood empty except for a few garment bags hanging in one corner. "Mr. Volkov arranged for some basic wardrobe items," Mrs. Chen explained, noticing Elena's gaze. "He wasn't certain of your sizes or preferences. If you provide me with measurements and style preferences, I can arrange for a proper wardrobe to be delivered. That won't be necessary. Elena's voice sounded hollow even to her own ears. I have clothes. As you wish. Your belongings should arrive tomorrow from your previous residence. Mr. Volkov had them collected this morning. Of course he did. Efficient. Thorough. He'd acquired a wife the same way he probably acquired companies, with clinical precision and zero emotional investment. Mrs. Chen moved toward the door, then paused. Dinner's at 7, but Mr. Volkov typically takes his meals in his study. I can bring a tray to your room if you prefer. That would be fine. Very well. If you need anything, there's an intercom panel by the door. Press the button marked Housekeeping, and someone will respond. Then Elena was alone. She stood in the center of the sitting room as the sun sank lower outside the windows, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple that would have been beautiful if she could feel anything beyond the numbness spreading through her limbs. Slowly, she crossed to the windows and looked down at the grounds below. Manicured gardens, a pool covered for winter, tennis courts, and beyond it all, the high walls that enclosed the property. A gilded cage. Elena pressed her forehead against the cool glass. She should cry, shouldn't she? This was her wedding day, the day that was supposed to mark the beginning of forever. And instead it marked the end of everything she'd built, everything she'd been. But the tears wouldn't come. Maybe they'd frozen along with everything else. She stayed at the window until full dark, until the grounds below became a patchwork of shadows, interrupted by security lighting. Somewhere in this vast house, Adrian Volkov went about his business, phone calls, meetings, whatever it was that crime lords did in the evening hours. Did he think of her at all? Remember he'd acquired a wife today? Probably not. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. Mrs. Chen returned with a dinner tray, roasted chicken with vegetables, a small salad, sparkling water in a crystal glass. The food was beautifully prepared and tasted like absolutely nothing. Elena forced herself to eat anyway, mechanically, the way she imagined she would do most things from now on. Mechanically. Numbly. Distantly. That night, she lay in the enormous bed, wrapped in sheets with a thread count that probably exceeded her former monthly income, and stared at the ceiling. Sleep felt impossible. Her mind kept circling the same questions. How long would this last? What exactly did Adrian expect from her? What happened if she simply left? She knew the answer to that last one. Her father would pay. Whatever arrangement Adrian had made regarding Gregor's debt, it certainly included provisions for breach of contract. Elena was the collateral, but Gregor remained the debtor. She was trapped by love for a man who'd never loved her enough to stop gambling their lives away. The cruelty of it stung worse than Adrian's indifference. The first weeks established a pattern that would define their marriage. Elena woke alone, ate breakfast alone in her sitting room while watching the sun rise over the grounds. Around 9, she would retreat to the smallest room in her suite, a space she'd claimed as a studio, and lose herself in her work. She had commissions to complete, deadlines that didn't care about her new circumstances. The familiar ritual of sketching botanical subjects, mixing colors, applying paint with precise brushstrokes, became a lifeline, the only thing that felt real in this surreal existence. Adrian remained a ghost in his own house. She heard him sometimes, footsteps in distant hallways, his voice low and sharp on phone calls behind closed doors. Occasionally, she'd glimpse him from her window, crossing to his car in the morning, returning late at night. He wore suits like armor, moved with the controlled grace of someone always aware of potential threats. They inhabited the same house, but different universes. 3 weeks after the wedding, Mrs. Chen knocked on Elena's door with a request. Mr. Volkov will be hosting a dinner party this Saturday evening. He asks that you attend. Formal attire. So it begins, Elena thought. The performance. Saturday arrived with the inevitability of a storm. Mrs. Chen helped her prepare, guiding her toward one of the garment bags in the closet, a midnight blue gown that fit perfectly despite Elena never having provided measurements. Of course it fit. Adrian Volkov didn't make mistakes. She studied herself in the mirror. The woman looking back was elegant, composed, a perfect accessory for a powerful man, nothing like the Elena who used to wear paint-stained jeans and lose track of time while working on a particularly challenging leaf structure. At 7:30, she descended to the main floor for the first time since her arrival. The ground floor had been transformed. Caterers moved through the rooms with practiced efficiency, setting up bars and arranging hors d'oeuvres. In the formal dining room, a table had been set for 12 with china so delicate it looked like it might shatter if you breathed on it too hard. Mrs. Volkov. She turned. Adrian stood in the doorway of what must be his study, and for a moment, Elena forgot how to breathe. He wore a tuxedo with the same casual perfection some men wore t-shirts, his dark hair precisely styled, those storm-colored eyes assessing her with the same detached interest as always. But something flickered in his gaze as he looked at her, there and gone so quickly she might have imagined it. "You look acceptable," he said, and somehow the faint praise felt worse than an insult. "Thank you." Elena kept her voice carefully neutral. "What do I need to know about tonight?" "Several business associates and their wives. You are to smile, make small talk, and give the impression of a devoted newly married couple. Can you manage that?" The condescension in his tone sparked something hot in her chest, the first real emotion she'd felt in weeks. "I think I can handle basic social interaction, yes." His eyes narrowed slightly. "You're angry." "I'm functional. Isn't that what you purchased?" For a long moment they stared at each other across the gleaming marble floor. Something dangerous moved in the space between them, something that felt almost alive. Then the doorbell chimed and the moment shattered. "Showtime," Adrian murmured, and crossed the distance between them with swift strides. Before Elena could react, he took her hand, tucking it into the crook of his arm. His touch was warm, the first time their skin had made contact since he'd slid the ring onto her finger at the courthouse. Elena's pulse kicked up despite herself. Together they moved to greet their guests. The evening unfolded like a carefully choreographed performance. Elena smiled and laughed in all the right places, played the role of the adoring new bride with surprising ease. Adrian kept her close, his hand at the small of her back, his attention seemingly focused on her even as he conducted business through every conversation. To an outside observer, they must have looked like any other couple in the early throes of marriage. Elena found the deception exhausting. "Your wife is lovely, Adrian," said Marcus Chen, a silver-haired man who owned half the commercial real estate in the city. "However did you convince such a beauty to marry you?" Adrian's smile was all teeth and no warmth. "I can be very persuasive when necessary." The words sent a chill down Elena's spine. Dinner was an elaborate affair, 6 courses, each more pretentious than the last. Elena sat at Adrian's right hand, the position of honor, and maintained her mask even as the conversation turned to business she didn't understand. Shipping routes and distribution networks, permits and political connections. The language was coded, but the meaning clear enough. These men built empires on the bones of the law, and Adrian ruled them all. She watched him across the candlelight, this stranger she'd married. He commanded the room effortlessly, his intelligence sharp as a blade, his authority absolute. People deferred to him instinctively, sought his approval, feared his disapproval. What would it be like, Elena wondered, to have that attention focused on you? Not as a business asset, but as a person? As if sensing her thoughts, Adrian turned his head, meeting her gaze. Something flickered in those winter eyes again, something that might have been curiosity or might have been warning. Elena looked away first. After dinner, the party moved to the library for drinks and cigars. The wives clustered in small groups, and Elena found herself fielding questions about her whirlwind romance with Adrian. "It must be like a fairy tale," gushed Victoria Rostov, whose husband controlled most of the city's waste management, and Elena suspected a good portion of its disposal of inconvenient evidence. "Such a powerful man, so devoted. You're very lucky." Lucky. Elena wanted to laugh. Instead, she smiled and said, "I'm very grateful." It wasn't a lie, exactly. She was grateful. Grateful her father was still breathing, grateful for the roof over her head and the food she ate. Just not for any of the reasons Victoria assumed. By midnight, the last guest departed in a cloud of expensive cologne and self-satisfaction. Elena stood beside Adrian in the doorway, waving as cars disappeared down the long drive, and the moment the doors closed, she felt him withdraw. The warmth in his touch vanished. The attention in his gaze evaporated. "You performed adequately," he said, already turning toward his study. Adequately. Like she'd completed a task, filed a report, met minimum expectations. "Adrian." The name felt strange on her tongue, intimate and foreign at once. He paused, half turned toward her, one eyebrow raised in inquiry. Elena wasn't sure what she'd meant to say. Thank you? Fuck you? Can you at least pretend I'm human? But the words tangled in her throat, useless and insufficient. Nothing, she finally whispered. Good night. She climbed the stairs to her floor, her cage, and didn't look back. Winter settled over the estate with brutal efficiency. The grounds transformed into a landscape of bare trees and frozen fountains, beautiful in a desolate way that matched Elena's existence perfectly. She'd been married for 3 months and had spoken fewer than 100 words to her husband beyond the performances they staged for his business associates. They hosted dinner parties every few weeks, carefully orchestrated events where Elena played her role with increasing numbness. Between performances, she existed in her gilded isolation, painting flowers and trying not to count the days stretching endlessly ahead. Her father called sometimes. She let most calls go to voicemail. When she did answer, Gregor's voice carried equal parts relief and guilt, asking if she was all right, if Adrian treated her well, if there was anything he could do. I'm fine, she always said. Because what else could she say? That she lived in luxury and died a little more each day? That her husband treated her with the same warmth he'd show a piece of furniture? That she'd become a ghost haunting her own life? Gregor couldn't fix this. No one could. In February, Mrs. Chen invited Elena to help plan the spring gardens. Mr. Volkov mentioned you have expertise with plants, the housekeeper said, presenting sketches of the grounds. He thought you might enjoy contributing to the landscaping decisions. It was the first indication Adrian had noticed anything about her beyond her ability to smile convincingly at his associates. Elena stared at the sketches, something almost like hope flickering in her chest before she ruthlessly crushed it. A consolation prize. A way to keep the prisoner occupied. But she worked on the garden plans anyway, because what else did she have? March arrived with the promise of thaw, though the cold inside the mansion remained constant. Elena had learned to navigate the house during Adrian's absence, exploring rooms she wasn't forbidden from entering. The library became a favorite refuge, floor-to-ceiling shelves filled with books on everything from philosophy to engineering. Adrian's collection, she assumed, though she'd never seen him read anything that wasn't a contract or financial report. One evening, she found herself there after dinner, curled in a leather armchair with a volume on Renaissance art. Rain drummed against the windows, the sound almost soothing. She was so absorbed in a chapter on botanical symbolism that she didn't hear footsteps in the hallway. That's a first edition. Elena's head snapped up. Adrian stood in the doorway, still in his work clothes, charcoal trousers and a white shirt with the sleeves rolled to his elbows. He looked tired, she realized. When had she started noticing things like that? I'm sorry. She started to close the book. I didn't realize. It's fine. He crossed to the bar cart in the corner, poured 2 fingers of scotch into a crystal tumbler. You're welcome to use the library. He'd never told her that before. Never told her she was welcome anywhere. Elena watched as he settled into the armchair opposite hers, his long legs stretched toward the fireplace where flames crackled against the late winter chill. For several minutes, they sat in silence. Not the hostile silence that usually existed between them, but something almost companionable. Do you like Renaissance art? Adrian asked finally, his gaze on the fire. The question surprised her. In 4 months of marriage, he'd never asked her opinion about anything beyond whether she wanted more wine at dinner parties. I like the symbolism, she said carefully, how they used flowers and plants to communicate meanings that couldn't be spoken aloud, hidden messages in plain sight, coded language for dangerous truths, something that might have been amusement ghosted across his features. I can appreciate that. Of course he could. His entire life was coded language and hidden meanings. What about you? Elena heard herself ask. Do you actually read these books, or are they just impressive wallpaper? She expected him to take offense, to freeze her out with that glacial stare. Instead, he smiled, a real smile, small and fleeting, but genuine. I read, he said. Not as often as I'd like, but yes, I read. They fell silent again. Elena should leave, return to her floor, maintain the careful distance that defined their arrangement. But the rain and the fire and the unexpected, almost warmth in his voice kept her rooted to the chair. Why did you marry me? The question emerged before she could stop it. Really, there had to be other ways to appear stable to your associates. Adrian took a long sip of scotch, considering. When he spoke, his voice carried a weight she hadn't heard before. My world is built on perception. Power is as much about what people believe as what actually exists. The right associates needed to see me as someone with something to lose, someone invested in the future, in legacy. A wife provides that. Children, eventually, would provide more. Children. The word hit her like a fist to the sternum. Of course. That would be the next performance, wouldn't it? The devoted father, the family man, all smoke and mirrors to hide the monster underneath. I see. Elena closed the book, setting it carefully on the side table. And here I thought you just needed a decoration for your dinner parties. Elena, but she was already standing, already moving toward the door. Thank you for letting me use your library. I'll be more careful with the first editions in the future. She fled before he could respond, before the burning in her eyes could turn into actual tears. Back to her suite, her cage, where at least the isolation was honest. That night she dreamed of gardens where every flower carried a message she couldn't decode, and winter eyes that watched her from between the thorns. The conversation in the library became a turning point neither of them acknowledged. Over the following weeks, Elena noticed subtle shifts in the architecture of their separation. Adrian still maintained his distance, still kept to his floor and his schedules, but occasionally she'd find fresh flowers in her studio, species she'd mentioned wanting to paint during one of their stilted dinner party conversations. Once she discovered a book on botanical illustration techniques on her breakfast tray, a first edition so rare she was afraid to touch it. No notes accompanied these offerings. No explanations. But they spoke a language Elena was beginning to understand, the coded communication of someone who'd forgotten how to express kindness directly. She told herself not to read too much into it. Adrian Volkov was a man who dealt in transactions, and perhaps these small gestures were simply maintenance on his investment, keeping his wife content enough to continue performing her role. But late at night, when the mansion settled into its particular silence and sleep refused to come, Elena found herself wondering what it would be like if the gifts meant something more. April brought warmer weather and another dinner party, this one larger than usual. Elena had learned to recognize the signs. Extra staff hired for the evening, Mrs. Chen's increased attention to detail, the tension that seemed to radiate from Adrian in the days leading up to these events. This one is important, he told her the morning of the party, catching her in the hallway outside her studio. The encounter startled them both, their paths so carefully choreographed to avoid intersection that an accidental meeting felt almost transgressive. They're all important, Elena replied, clutching her sketchbook to her chest like a shield. Not like this. Adrian's jaw was tight, a muscle ticking beneath the skin. Dmitry Kozlov will be attending. He controls shipping access to the eastern ports. I need his cooperation for a venture that's been in development for 2 years. And you need me to smile and play the devoted wife. I need you to be convincing. His eyes met hers, and for a moment, Elena saw something beneath the ice. Not warmth, exactly, but something closer to urgency. Kozlov is traditional. He values family, stability, legacy. He needs to believe our marriage is real. Real. The word hung between them like an accusation. I'll do my job, Elena said quietly. I always do. Something flickered across Adrian's face. Regret, maybe, or frustration. But before she could identify it, his mask slipped back into place. Thank you. The dress being delivered this afternoon is for tonight. Wear it. He walked away before she could respond, his footsteps echoing down the marble hallway until distance swallowed the sound entirely. The dress arrived at 3 o'clock, a creation of emerald silk that probably cost more than Elena used to make in 6 months. It fit like it had been designed specifically for her body, which it probably had. She studied herself in the mirror as Mrs. Chen fastened the delicate clasp at her neck and barely recognized the woman looking back. Polished, elegant, expensive. Everything Elena Varga had never been, and everything Elena Volkov was required to become. The party began at 8. Elena descended the stairs to find the ground floor transformed into something from a magazine spread. Candlelight and crystal, Servers in crisp uniforms circulating with champagne and delicacies that probably required tweezers to prepare. 50 guests mingled in the main rooms, their laughter and conversation creating a sophisticated din. Adrian waited at the bottom of the stairs, devastating in a midnight blue suit that made his eyes look even more storm dark. When he saw her, something shifted in his expression. There and gone so quickly, Elena couldn't name it, but it made her pulse kick up despite everything. Beautiful, he murmured as she reached him, offering his arm. Not, you look beautiful, or the dress is beautiful, just the single word, and somehow that made it feel almost genuine. Thank you. Elena placed her hand in the crook of his elbow, felt the warmth of him through the expensive fabric. Where's Kozlov? Not here yet. He likes to make an entrance. Adrian guided her into the crowd, his hand settling at the small of her back, a possessive gesture that was pure performance but sent heat spreading through her anyway. When he arrives, let me lead the conversation. He's old-fashioned about women's roles. Of course he is, Elena muttered. Adrian's mouth twitched, almost a smile. Can you pretend to be appropriately demure for one evening? I've been pretending for 5 months. What's one more night? This time the smile reached his eyes, brief but real, and Elena's breath caught. She'd never seen him smile like that, not the cold, calculated expressions he wore for his associates, but something approaching genuine amusement. It transformed his face entirely. Then Dmitry Kozlov arrived, and Adrian's warmth evaporated like morning frost. Kozlov was a bear of a man, 60-something with silver hair and a beard that made him look like a department store Santa who'd chosen organized crime over toy distribution. He swept into the room with an entourage of younger men, sons or lieutenants, Elena couldn't tell which, and the party's energy shifted immediately. People gravitated toward him or away from him in equal measure, like planets responding to a massive gravitational force. Adrian! Kozlov's voice boomed across the room. There you are, you secretive bastard. I hear congratulations are in order. Adrian's hand tightened fractionally against Elena's back, the only sign of tension in his otherwise perfect composure. Dmitry, thank you for coming. May I introduce my wife, Elena? Kozlov's gaze swept over her with the thoroughness of a jeweler appraising a stone. Elena forced herself to hold still under that inspection, to keep her smile in place and her eyes appropriately downcast, everything Adrian needed her to be. Stunning, Kozlov pronounced finally. Adrian, you've been holding out on us. When did this happen? Last October. We kept it quiet. Elena prefers privacy. A woman who doesn't crave the spotlight? In this city? Kozlov laughed, a sound like rolling thunder. You've found a rare creature, my friend. Treasure her. I intend to. Adrian's arm slipped around Elena's waist, drawing her closer against his side. The gesture should have felt calculated, performative, but the heat of his body against hers made thinking difficult. Come, let's talk. Kozlov gestured toward the library. Bring your lovely wife. In my experience, the smart men discuss business where their women can hear. Keeps everyone honest. They settled in the library, Elena on the leather couch beside Adrian, close enough that their thighs touched, while Kozlov claimed the armchair she'd occupied that rainy night weeks ago. 2 of Kozlov's men stood by the door, silent and watchful. Now then, Kozlov said, accepting a glass of vodka from one of the servers. Let's discuss your proposal regarding the eastern shipping routes. What followed was a conversation conducted in the coded language Elena had learned to recognize. Shipping routes that were actually smuggling corridors, distribution networks that moved products no legitimate business would touch. Political connections that existed in the gray spaces between legal and criminal. Adrian navigated the discussion with the precision of a chess master, offering concessions that seemed generous but cost him nothing, asking for access that appeared limited but would give him control over the entire eastern seaboard. Elena watched him work and understood, perhaps for the first time, why people feared this man. His intelligence was a weapon, sharp and perfectly controlled. You've thought this through, Kozlov observed after Adrian finished outlining his proposal. But I'm still not convinced. The eastern routes are valuable. Why should I give you access? Because I'm offering you something you need more than territory. Adrian's hand found Elena's, their fingers interlacing with practiced ease. Stability. My operations are clean, efficient, and invisible to law enforcement. Partner with me, and your shipments move with zero risk. Refuse, and you continue navigating the current chaos alone. Clean, Kozlov snorted. Nothing in our world is clean, Adrian. Cleaner than your current options. They stared at each other across the space between armchair and couch, two apex predators measuring strength. Elena held perfectly still, aware that she was part of Adrian's armor in this moment, evidence of his stability, his investment in conventional structure, proof that he was more than just another ambitious criminal. Finally, Kozlov's weathered face cracked into a grin. You make a compelling argument, and I admit seeing you settled gives me confidence. A man with a wife, potentially children in the future. Such a man thinks long-term, yes? Yes. Adrian's thumb traced circles on the back of Elena's hand, an absent gesture that might have been unconscious. Elena and I are very much thinking about the future. The lie sat between them like a living thing. Elena felt it pressing against her chest, making breathing difficult. But she smiled, played her role, let Kozlov see exactly what he wanted to see. Then we have an agreement. Kozlov raised his glass. To partnerships and profitable futures. Adrian lifted his own glass, and Elena reached for the champagne she'd been nursing all evening. The crystal chimed as they toasted, sealing whatever deal had just been struck in language she only partially understood. Kozlov departed shortly after, taking his entourage and his approval with him. The party continued for another hour, but Elena felt Adrian's tension ease fractionally. A relaxation so subtle she only noticed because she'd learned to read the minute shifts in his body language. The last guest trickled out around midnight. Elena stood beside Adrian in the doorway, waving farewell, feeling the exhaustion of performance settling into her bones. 5 months of this. 5 months of smiling and pretending and being whatever Adrian needed her to be. How many more months stretched ahead? The doors closed. The staff began the efficient work of transforming the house back to its usual pristine state. Adrian's hand slipped from her waist, and Elena felt the cold rush in where his warmth had been. She started toward the stairs, eager to escape to her suite. Elena? His voice stopped her mid-step. She turned, found him watching her with an expression she couldn't decipher. Thank you, he said quietly. Tonight was important. You were perfect. Perfect. Like the dress, the flowers, the performance. All surfaces, no substance. You're welcome. Elena kept her voice carefully neutral. Will that be all, Mr. Volkov? Something shifted in his gaze, a flash of what might have been hurt or anger. It's Adrian. You're my wife, not my employee. Am I? The question emerged sharper than she intended. Because from where I'm standing, this feels exactly like employment. You pay me in security and luxury. I provide services as required. The only difference is the title. That's not... He stopped, jaw clenching. This arrangement benefits us both. It benefits you. I'm just surviving it. They stared at each other across the gleaming marble floor, and Elena saw the moment his walls slammed back into place. Whatever vulnerability had flickered in his expression vanished, replaced by the cold mask she knew so well. I see. His voice could have frozen water. My apologies for the confusion. You're dismissed, Mrs. Volkov. Elena climbed the stairs with her spine straight and her eyes dry, refusing to give him the satisfaction of seeing how much the dismissal stung. Only when she reached her suite, when the door closed behind her and locked her into familiar isolation, did she let herself feel the weight of it all. She sank onto the edge of the bed, still wearing the emerald dress, and pressed her hands against her face. This was her life now. This performance, this distance, this careful dance around genuine feeling. She could survive it. She was surviving it. But at what cost? How long before the pretending erased the real Elena entirely, leaving only this polished shell? A sharp knock interrupted her spiral. Elena's head snapped up, heart suddenly racing. No one came to her floor, ever. Mrs. Volkov? Mrs. Chen's voice filtered through the door. I'm sorry to disturb you, but there's a situation. Mr. Volkov requests your presence in his study immediately. The word sent ice through Elena's veins. Situations in Adrian's world didn't mean minor inconveniences. They meant danger. She opened the door to find Mrs. Chen looking genuinely worried, the first crack in the housekeeper's professional composure Elena had ever witnessed. "What's happened?" "I don't know the details, but you should hurry." Elena followed Mrs. Chen downstairs, her mind racing through possibilities. Had something gone wrong with Kozlov's deal? Had someone threatened Adrian? Was her father— The thought stopped her mid-step. If something had happened to Gregor, if he'd done something stupid and gotten himself killed, would she feel relief or grief? She didn't know the answer, and that terrified her more than the summons itself. Mrs. Chen led her to Adrian's study, a room Elena had never entered, and knocked softly before opening the door. The study was exactly what she would have expected. Dark wood, leather furniture, walls lined with books and filing cabinets that probably contained enough incriminating evidence to fill a courthouse. Adrian stood with his back to the door, staring out the window at the dark grounds, his shoulders rigid beneath his suit jacket. "Mr. Volkov, Mrs. Volkov is here." "Thank you, Mrs. Chen. You may go." The door closed with a soft click, leaving them alone. For a long moment, Adrian didn't turn, didn't speak. Elena waited, her pulse hammering against her ribs, aware that she'd never seen him like this. Posture tight with tension, control fraying at the edges. "There was an incident tonight," he said finally, his voice carefully measured. "After Kozlov left, someone attempted to breach the estate's security." Elena's breath caught. Did they? They were apprehended before reaching the house. Adrian turned to face her, and in the lamplight she could see the slight tremor in his hands before he clenched them into fists. "But they got close. Too close." "Who were they?" "Competition. Someone unhappy about my arrangement with Kozlov." His gaze met hers, and Elena saw something she'd never seen before in those winter eyes. Genuine fear. Not for himself, she realized with startling clarity, but for her. "They were carrying photographs. Of you." The words hit like a physical blow. Elena's knees went weak, and she reached for the back of a nearby chair to steady herself. "They know you're important to me," Adrian continued, his voice dropping to something almost gentle. "Or they think you are, which means you're a target now." "I'm not important to you." The words came automatically, defensive. "I'm a prop, remember? Part of the performance." "Elena, you said it yourself. This arrangement is about appearances, about what people believe. If they believe I matter to you, that's because you've been convincing. It doesn't make it real." "Doesn't it?" Adrian crossed the distance between them in 3 long strides, and suddenly he was close enough that Elena could see the flecks of darker gray in his eyes, close enough that his cedar scent surrounded her. "If you died tomorrow because someone wanted to hurt me, would it matter whether the emotion was real? You'd still be dead." The bluntness shocked her. "That's very practical of you." "I'm trying to keep you safe." "Why?" The question burst out of her, months of frustration and confusion and loneliness pouring into the single word. "Why does it matter? You don't even like me. We barely speak outside of dinner parties. You think I don't like you?" Something that might have been incredulity flashed across his face. "Elena, I've been trying to keep my distance because the alternative is dangerous." "What alternative?" Instead of answering, Adrian reached out and caught her hand. The same hand he'd held during the meeting with Kozlov, his thumb finding that same spot on her palm. But this time, there was no audience, no performance to maintain. This time, it was just them. "The alternative where I stop pretending," he said quietly, his gaze locked on their joined hands. "Where I stop keeping you at arm's length because it's safer for both of us. Where I acknowledge that somewhere between October and April, this arrangement became complicated." Elena's heart hammered so hard she thought it might crack her ribs. "Adrian, I know." He lifted his eyes to hers. "I know this isn't what you signed up for. I know I've been cold and distant and everything you accused me of being. But having you in this house, seeing you every day, even from a distance, watching you create beauty in your studio when you think no one's paying attention." He stopped, jaw working. "It's been harder than I anticipated." "Then why the distance? Why the separate floors? The careful avoidance? Because you deserve better than me." The words came out harsh, almost angry. "You deserve someone who didn't buy you to settle a debt. Someone who can give you a real marriage. Not this." He gestured around the study, encompassing the house, their arrangement, everything. "But I'm selfish enough that I can't let you go either. So I keep my distance and pretend it's enough." Elena stared at him, her entire understanding of the past 5 months shifting like a kaleidoscope turned 1 degree too far. All those small gestures, the flowers, the books, the careful orchestration of their lives to minimize painful proximity, had those been protection? For her or for him? "You're right," she said finally. "I do deserve better than a man who bought me. But you're wrong about one thing." "What's that?" "I haven't spent these months wishing for different circumstances." Elena stepped closer, closing the careful distance Adrian had maintained. "I've spent them wondering what would happen if the ice melted, if we stopped performing and started being honest." His breath caught. "Elena, I'm angry at you," she continued, needing to say it all before courage failed. "I'm angry that you reduced me to a transaction, that you've kept me isolated in a gilded cage, that you've treated me like expensive furniture for 5 months. But I'm also—" She stopped, searching for words. "I'm also tired of pretending I don't notice when you leave flowers in my studio, that I don't see you watching me from across the room at those dinner parties, like you're not sure whether you want to get closer or run away. That I don't feel something when you touch me, even when I know it's just for show." The silence stretched between them, fragile and terrifying. Then Adrian moved. His hand came up to cup her face, his thumb brushing across her cheekbone with devastating gentleness. "If we do this," he said, his voice rough, "if we stop maintaining distance, there's no going back. My world is dangerous, Elena. Tonight proved that. Getting close to me puts you at risk." "I'm already at risk. I became a target the moment I signed that marriage certificate." "This would be different. If people think you actually matter to me, maybe I want to matter." The admission felt like stepping off a cliff. "Maybe I'm tired of being decoration and want to be real." Something broke in his expression, all that careful control shattering like ice under sudden heat. His other hand came up to frame her face, and he stared at her like he was memorizing every detail, like she might disappear if he blinked. "Real is messy," he warned. "I can handle messy. Real means you see all of me, the parts I keep hidden. I want to see them." Adrian's eyes searched hers for another long moment. Then he lowered his head and kissed her. It wasn't gentle. There was nothing careful or controlled about the way his mouth claimed hers, 5 months of distance and denial pouring into the contact. Elena gasped against his lips, her hands coming up to grip his shoulders, and he took advantage of her parted lips to deepen the kiss until she couldn't tell where performance ended and reality began. Maybe there was no difference anymore. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Adrian rested his forehead against hers. "This is a terrible idea," he murmured. "Probably. We should maintain distance, keep things professional." "We should." "I'm not going to." His hands tightened on her face. "I can't." Elena's answer was to pull him back down, to kiss him with all the frustration and loneliness and unexpected want that had been building for months. He made a sound low in his throat, something between a growl and a groan. And suddenly they were moving, stumbling backward until Elena's back hit the wall beside the window. Adrian's mouth traced fire down her neck, his hands mapping the curves of her body through the emerald silk, and Elena arched into his touch like she'd been waiting her entire life for this moment. Maybe she had been. Maybe everything before, the gambling debts, the forced marriage, the cold distance, had all been leading here, to this collision of heat and need. His hand found the zipper at the back of her dress, and Elena felt the cool air on her skin as he slowly drew it down. She should stop this. They should talk, establish boundaries, figure out what this meant. But talking required thinking, and thinking was impossible when Adrian's mouth found the hollow at the base of her throat and she could feel him trembling against her. He wanted her. Not as a prop or a performance, but as a woman. As Elena. The realization undid something in her chest, some tight knot of hurt she'd been carrying since October. "Adrian," she whispered, her fingers threading through his dark hair. "Please." He lifted his head, his eyes dark and wild, all that careful control burned away. "Are you sure? Because if we do this, I'm sure." That was all the permission he needed. The emerald dress pooled at her feet, and Adrian's jacket followed, then his shirt, until there was nothing between them but skin and heat and desperate need. He lifted her easily, her legs wrapping around his waist, and carried her to the leather couch. They came together in a tangle of limbs and gasping breaths. 5 months of carefully maintained distance combusting into something fierce and consuming. Elena had imagined this moment, late at night when she couldn't sleep. She'd wondered what it would be like if Adrian touched her, not for show, but for real. The reality was better and more devastating than any fantasy. Afterward, they lay tangled together on the couch, Elena's head on Adrian's chest, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on her bare shoulder. The study was quiet except for their gradually slowing breaths and the ticking of an antique clock somewhere in the darkness. Reality began to creep back in, bringing questions and complications with it. "What happens now?" Elena asked quietly. Adrian's hand stilled on her shoulder. "I don't know. I didn't plan this." "I know. Everything about tonight, about the security breach and the photographs, it made me realize how much I have to lose." His arm tightened around her. "I've spent 5 months telling myself the distance was necessary, that keeping you safe meant keeping you away. But if something happened to you and I'd never—" He stopped, his chest rising and falling beneath her cheek. "I couldn't live with that." Elena lifted her head to look at him. In the dim light filtering through the window, Adrian looked younger, more vulnerable than she'd ever seen him. The mask was completely gone, leaving only the man. "So what do we do?" she pressed. "Go back to separate floors and pretend this didn't happen?" "No." The word came quickly, firmly. "No more separate floors. No more pretending." His hand came up to cup her face again, his thumb brushing across her cheekbone. "But we need to be smart about this. The people who tried to breach the estate tonight, they won't be the last. My enemies will try to use you against me. Then we'll deal with them together." "Elena, I'm not fragile, Adrian. I'm not some delicate thing that needs to be locked away for safekeeping." She sat up, holding the throw blanket against her chest. "If we're doing this, if we're making this real, then you need to stop trying to protect me by pushing me away. That's what got us into this mess in the first place." He stared at her for a long moment, something that might have been admiration flickering in his eyes. "You're right. I'm sorry. Old habits. Break them." A smile, small but genuine, crossed his face. "You're going to be trouble, aren't you?" "Absolutely." Adrian pulled her back down against his chest, his arms wrapping around her like he was afraid she might disappear. They lay there in this darkness, two people who'd collided by accident and choice in equal measure, and Elena felt the ice that had defined their marriage finally begin to crack. Not shatter, not yet, but crack. And where the cracks formed, something warmer seeped through. Outside, dawn began to lighten the eastern sky, and somewhere in the vast house, the staff would soon begin their morning routines. But in the study, wrapped in Adrian's arms, Elena allowed herself to hope that maybe, just maybe, this terrible arrangement might transform into something worth keeping. The future remained uncertain. Danger still lurked beyond the estate's walls, but for the first time since October, Elena didn't face it alone, and that, she thought, as sleep finally claimed her, made all the difference. Elena woke to sunlight streaming through unfamiliar windows and the disorienting realization that she wasn't in her own bed. The leather couch beneath her, the weight of Adrian's arm draped across her waist, the faint scent of cedar and expensive scotch. It all came rushing back in a flood of memory that made her pulse quicken. Last night had been real. The kiss, the confession, the way they'd come together like 5 months of denial had finally combusted into something neither of them could control. She shifted slightly, and Adrian's arm tightened around her, pulling her closer against the warmth of his chest. His breathing remained deep and even, still asleep. Elena tilted her head back to study his face, this man who'd been a stranger with a ring on her finger for so long. In sleep, without the mask of control, he looked almost peaceful, younger. The harsh lines around his mouth had softened, and his dark lashes cast shadows on his cheekbones. One lock of hair had fallen across his forehead, disrupting the usual perfect styling. Elena reached up carefully, smoothing it back, and Adrian's eyes opened. For a moment, they simply looked at each other. Then a slow smile spread across his face, genuine and unguarded in a way that made Elena's chest ache. "Good morning," he murmured, his voice rough with sleep. "Good morning." Elena felt suddenly shy, aware of her nakedness beneath the throw blanket, of how different everything felt in daylight. I should probably stay. His hand came up to cup her face, thumb brushing across her cheekbone in that gesture that was becoming familiar. Please, we need to talk. The word sent a spike of anxiety through her. How many relationships ended with those 4 words? But Adrian's expression held no coldness, no regret, just something that looked almost like uncertainty. All right, Elena said softly. Adrian sat up, reaching for his discarded shirt and handing it to her before pulling on his trousers. Elena slipped into the shirt. It fell to mid-thigh on her, the fabric still warm from his body, and watched as he crossed to the window, running a hand through his disheveled hair. Last night, he began, then stopped, seeming to search for words. Last night wasn't supposed to happen. Elena's stomach dropped. I see. No, let me finish. He turned to face her, his expression serious. It wasn't supposed to happen, but I'm not sorry it did. The opposite, actually. I'm sorry it took me 5 months in a security breach to stop being a coward. You're not a coward. I am when it matters. Adrian crossed back to the couch, sitting beside her and taking her hand. I've built my entire life on control. Every variable managed, every risk calculated. And then you walked into that courthouse in your gray dress looking terrified and trying so hard to be brave, and I knew immediately that you were dangerous. Dangerous? Elena couldn't help the small laugh that escaped. Adrian, you're the most feared man in the city. I'm a botanical illustrator who can barely manage confrontation with telemarketers. Exactly. You're real, Elena, genuine in a way that's completely foreign to my world. Everyone I know operates from angles, from self-interest, but you, his thumb traced circles on her palm. You were forced into this marriage to save your father, a man who gambled away your future without a second thought, and yet you still take his calls. You still worry about him. He's my father. He doesn't deserve you. The words came out harsh. Neither do I. But I'm selfish enough to want you anyway. Elena studied their joined hands, processing his words. What are you saying? I'm saying I want this to be real. Not just the physical part, though. A ghost of a smile crossed his face. Last night was extraordinary, but I want the rest of it too. The conversations, the shared meals, the simple act of existing in the same space without it feeling like we're walking through a minefield. You want a real marriage. I want you. He lifted his eyes to hers. However you'll have me. If that means starting over, learning each other properly, then we start over. If it means you need time and space, I'll give you that. But no more separate floors. No more pretending you're just decoration for my business associates. Elena's heart hammered against her ribs. This was what she'd wanted, what she'd been too afraid to even hope for during those long months of isolation. But wanting and having were different things, and the man beside her was still Adrian Volkov, still the crime lord who'd bought her like property. I need honesty, she said finally. Complete honesty. No more coded language. No more keeping me in the dark about the dangerous parts of your world. If we're doing this, I need to actually understand who you are. Something flickered in Adrian's expression, wariness maybe, or fear. But he nodded. That's fair. What do you want to know? Everything. Elena took a breath. Start with last night. Who tried to breach the estate and why? Adrian was quiet for a moment, his jaw working. Then he stood, crossing to the desk and pulling out a folder. He returned to the couch, opening it to reveal photographs. Surveillance images of 3 men in tactical gear, their faces partially obscured. They work for the Castellano family, he said. Victor Castellano has been trying to expand his territory into the eastern ports for years. My deal with Kozlov effectively blocks him out. So he sent them to what? Kill you? Possibly. More likely to gather intelligence, find weak points in my security. Adrian's finger traced the edge of one photograph. But they were carrying pictures of you, high-resolution images from the dinner party, from your morning walks in the garden. They'd been watching you. The word sent ice down Elena's spine. For how long? At least 2 weeks, based on the timestamps. He looked at her, his expression grave. They know you're important to me now, or at least they think you are, which makes you leverage. So what do we do? I've already increased security around the estate. No one gets within 100 yards of the perimeter without being detected. But Elena, he hesitated. You need to understand what life with me actually means. The danger isn't theoretical. People will try to use you to get to me. They'll threaten you, potentially try to take you. Your freedom will be limited. It's already limited, Elena pointed out. I've been living in a gilded cage for 5 months. This is different. Before you were an asset to be protected. Now, if we do this, if we make this real, you become the thing I can't afford to lose. His hand found hers again, gripping tight. That makes you the most valuable target in the city. Elena absorbed this, turning over the implications. She'd known marrying Adrian meant entering his dangerous world, but she'd spent 5 months at a comfortable distance from the actual violence. Now he was offering to pull her closer, to let her see the blood beneath the elegant surface. Part of her wanted to retreat, to take the safety of ignorance and isolation, but a larger part, the part that had been slowly suffocating in her beautiful prison, wanted to step forward into the risk. Then teach me, she said firmly. Teach me how to navigate your world. Don't lock me away like something fragile. Give me the tools to protect myself. Adrian stared at her, something that looked like wonder crossing his face. You're serious. Completely. I'm tired of being helpless, Adrian. Tired of being something that just happens to, rather than someone who makes choices. She squeezed his hand. If I'm going to be a target anyway, I'd rather be a dangerous one. A slow smile spread across his face. Not the cold calculation he showed his associates, but something warm and real that transformed his features entirely. You continue to surprise me. Good. Keep me interesting and maybe you won't get bored. I could never be bored with you. He pulled her close, pressing a kiss to her temple. All right, we'll do this your way. Full transparency, proper training, but you have to promise me something. What? If I say run, you run. No questions, no hesitation. Can you do that? Elena considered this. It went against every instinct she had, the urge to understand, to know why, to make informed decisions. But she also understood that in Adrian's world, hesitation could mean death. I can do that, she agreed. Then we have a deal. Adrian stood, offering his hand. Come on. Mrs. Chen is probably already wondering why neither of us appeared for breakfast. Elena let him pull her to her feet, suddenly aware of her state of undress, wearing only his shirt, her hair tangled from sleep and sex, probably looking thoroughly ravished. I should go change. Or, Adrian suggested, his hand settling on her waist, you could have breakfast with me, in my quarters. Let the staff gossip a little. The suggestion was so unlike the Adrian of the past 5 months that Elena laughed. Scandalous! I'm a crime lord, Elena. Scandal is part of the job description. They made their way upstairs together, and for the first time since moving into the mansion, Elena entered the second floor. Adrian's quarters were larger than hers, a full apartment, really, with a sitting room, bedroom, bathroom, and a private office. The decor was masculine but not cold, all dark wood and leather with subtle touches that spoke of actual taste rather than designer intervention. This is nice, Elena said, running her hand along the back of a leather armchair. Much more lived in than the rest of the house. The main floors are for show. This is where I actually exist. Adrian moved to the phone, calling down to the kitchen for breakfast. When he hung up, he turned to find Elena studying a photograph on the bookshelf. A much younger Adrian with an older couple, all three smiling at the camera. My parents, he said quietly, coming to stand beside her. They died when I was 19. Car accident. I'm sorry. It was a long time ago. But his voice carried old grief, and Elena understood suddenly that this man who seemed invincible had known loss too. She slipped her hand into his, and he squeezed it gratefully. Breakfast arrived 20 minutes later, Mrs. Chen herself bringing the tray, her expression carefully neutral as she took in Elena's presence in Adrian's quarters, wearing his shirt, her bare legs visible beneath the hem. Good morning, Mrs. Chen, Adrian said smoothly, as if this were completely normal. Thank you for bringing this up yourself. Of course, Mr. Volkov. The housekeeper's eyes flicked to Elena. Mrs. Volkov, will you be wanting your belongings moved to the second floor? The question hung in the air. Adrian looked at Elena, leaving the choice to her. This was it. The moment where she either committed to this new reality or retreated to the safety of separation. Elena thought of the 5 months she'd spent alone on the third floor, painting flowers and slowly disappearing into isolation. Then she thought of last night, of Adrian's confession, of the way his touch had made her feel alive for the first time since October. "Yes," she said firmly. "Please move my things to the second floor." Mrs. Chen's professional mask cracked slightly, a small smile appearing before she caught it. "Very good. I'll have it arranged this morning." After the housekeeper left, Adrian pulled Elena into his arms. "You're sure about this?" "No," Elena admitted. "But I'm tired of playing it safe. Safe got me 5 months of loneliness. I'd rather risk the alternative." "The alternative might break your heart." "Then it breaks. At least I'll have felt something." Adrian kissed her then, deep and slow, and Elena felt the last of her reservations crumble. Whatever happened next, danger, complications, the inevitable messiness of turning a contract into something real, she was choosing it with eyes open. The next weeks unfolded in a strange new rhythm that was both terrifying and exhilarating. True to his word, Adrian began including Elena in aspects of his life he'd previously kept hidden. She sat in on conference calls with his legitimate business interests. He owned a surprising amount of actual legal enterprises and listened as he navigated the complicated politics of his world. He also made good on his promise to teach her self-defense. 3 mornings a week, a compact woman named Sonia arrived to put Elena through brutal training sessions in the estate's gym. "Again," Sonia barked, as Elena attempted to break a hold for the 4th time. "You're thinking too much. Instinct needs to be faster than thought." Elena gritted her teeth and tried again, this time managing to break free and create distance. Sonia's rare smile of approval made the aching muscles worthwhile. Adrian often watched these sessions from the doorway, his expression unreadable. Afterward, he'd pull Elena close despite her sweat-dampened state and kiss her like she'd done something extraordinary. "What?" she asked one morning, catching the odd look on his face. "I'm just appreciating how magnificent you are when you're dangerous," he said, and Elena laughed despite herself. Their physical relationship deepened too, moving beyond that first desperate coupling in the study. Adrian was an attentive lover, learning her body with the same focused intensity he brought to everything else. And Elena discovered she had her own power in these moments. The ability to make Adrian Volkov lose control, to draw gasps and groans from a man who showed the world nothing but ice. But it wasn't all passion and training. They also learned the quieter intimacies of shared life. Adrian liked his coffee black and his morning silent until he'd read the news. Elena needed light and music while she worked, and often painted late into the night when inspiration struck. He was meticulous about his appearance. She frequently forgot to eat when focused on a project. He read philosophy and history. She preferred novels and poetry. They were different in dozens of small ways, but somehow the differences fit together like puzzle pieces, creating something more complete than either had been alone. One evening in late May, Elena was working in her studio, now relocated to a sun-filled room on the second floor, adjacent to Adrian's office, when he appeared in the doorway. "I need to go out tonight," he said without preamble. "Business meeting at the docks. I'll probably be late." Elena set down her brush, studying his face. The tension around his eyes told her this wasn't a routine meeting. Dangerous business? It could be. Victor Castellano requested a face-to-face. Says he wants to discuss terms. The same Victor Castellano who sent men to breach our security? The same. Adrian moved into the room, his hands sliding into his pockets. "It's likely a trap, but I need to go anyway. Show strength. Make it clear I'm not intimidated." Fear spiked through Elena's chest. "Then take extra security. Take everyone." "I'm taking 6 men. More than that looks weak, like I'm afraid." "You should be afraid. He tried to have you killed. He tried to gather intelligence. If he'd wanted me dead, I'd be dead." Adrian's voice was matter-of-fact, and the casual acceptance of violence made Elena's stomach turn. This was the reality of his world, the part she'd asked to see. Death was a business decision, violence a negotiating tool. "When will you be back?" she asked quietly. "Late. Don't wait up." He started to turn, then paused. "Elena, if something goes wrong, don't." She stood quickly, crossing to him. "Don't finish that sentence. You're coming back." But if I don't, Adrian. Elena grabbed his face between her hands, forcing him to meet her eyes. You're coming back, say it. For a moment, he just looked at her, something raw and vulnerable moving behind his winter storm eyes. Then he nodded. I'm coming back. Promise me. I promise. He kissed her hard, almost desperately, and Elena poured every ounce of feeling into returning it, fear and love and the fierce demand that he keep his word. When he pulled away, his forehead rested against hers. I should go. Be careful. Always am. But as Elena watched him leave, flanked by his security team, she couldn't shake the cold dread settling in her stomach. Something about this felt wrong, too convenient, too perfectly arranged. The house felt cavernous without him. Elena tried to work, tried to read, tried to do anything that would make the hours pass faster. But her mind kept circling back to Adrian at the docks, to Victor Castellanos' false smile, to all the ways this meeting could go catastrophically wrong. Around midnight, her phone rang. An unknown number. Elena's heart leapt into her throat as she answered. Elena Volkov? An unfamiliar male voice, smooth and faintly accented. Yes. Who is this? A friend. I thought you should know your husband walked into a trap tonight. By now he's either dead or wishing he were. The world tilted sideways. Elena gripped the edge of Adrian's desk, her knees threatening to buckle. You're lying. Am I? Check the news in 10 minutes. You'll see a warehouse fire at the docks. Tragic accident, they'll call it. 3 bodies recovered so far, but I'm sure they'll find more once the flames die down. Who are you? What do you want? What I want is for you to remember this feeling when we come for you next. Adrian Volkov thought he could expand into territory that doesn't belong to him. Now he's learning the price of arrogance. And you, Mrs. Volkov, you're about to learn what happens to the widows of overreaching criminals. The line went dead. Elena stood frozen, the phone slipping from her nerveless fingers to clatter on the desk. Not real, she told herself. It couldn't be real. Adrian had promised he'd come back, but when she pulled up the local news on her laptop, her blood turned to ice. Breaking news banner across the top. Major fire at warehouse district near the docks. Multiple casualties reported. No, 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 no. Elena's hand shook as she dialed Adrian's number. It went straight to voicemail. She tried again. Same result. On the third attempt, her composure shattered completely, and she found herself gasping for air, panic constricting her chest like a vice. He couldn't be dead. Not when they'd just started being real with each other. Not when she'd finally let herself hope for something beyond survival. The sound of cars pulling up the drive made her jump. Elena ran to the window, hope and terror warring in her chest. 3 black SUVs, Adrian's vehicles, but when the doors opened, she didn't see him among the men who emerged. She flew down the stairs, meeting them in the entrance hall. Adrian's head of security, Marcus, looked grim, his face smudged with soot. Where is he? Elena demanded, her voice shrill even to her own ears. Where's Adrian? Mrs. Volkov, you need to sit down. No, tell me where my husband is. Marcus exchanged glances with the other men. There was an explosion at the warehouse. We got separated. Mr. Volkov and 2 others were still inside when he didn't need to finish. Elena's legs gave out, and Marcus caught her before she hit the marble floor. We're going back, he was saying, his voice seeming to come from very far away. Search and rescue is on site. But the fire, it's bad, Mrs. Volkov. It's really bad. Elena heard herself making sounds, animal noises of grief and denial that couldn't possibly be coming from her throat. This wasn't happening. It couldn't be happening. But then Marcus was helping her to the couch, and Mrs. Chen appeared with blankets and tea that Elena couldn't possibly drink, and the news kept playing on the television showing footage of the warehouse engulfed in flames, and it was happening. Adrian was gone. The man who'd been ice and distance for 5 months before finally thawing, who'd learned to smile again because of her, who'd promised just hours ago that he'd come back. He was gone. And Elena had never told him she loved him. The hours that followed existed in fragments, disconnected moments Elena's mind couldn't quite string together into coherent narrative. Marcus leaving with half the security team to return to the docks. Mrs. Chen pressing a cup of tea into her hands that went cold untouched. The television droning on with updates that said nothing new. Warehouse fire. Multiple casualties. Investigation ongoing. Elena sat on the couch in Adrian's study, wrapped in the blanket misses. Chin had draped over her shoulders and stared at nothing. Her body felt hollow, scooped out and left empty. She couldn't cry, couldn't scream, could barely breathe. Adrian was dead. The man who'd bought her kept her at distance, then finally let her in. Gone. Reduced to ash in a warehouse fire set by enemies who saw him as nothing more than an obstacle to be eliminated. And she'd never told him she loved him. The realization sat in her chest like a stone. In all their conversations over the past weeks, all the quiet intimacies and passionate nights, she'd never said the words. Had been too afraid, too cautious, too convinced that admitting love would give him power to hurt her. Now he was gone, and the words would stay locked inside her forever, useless and devastating. Mrs. Volkov. Elena's head snapped up. Marcus stood in the doorway, and something in his expression made her pulse spike. Not grief, not the look of a man delivering confirmation of death. Hope. What? Her voice came out ragged. What is it? We need to move. Now. Marcus crossed the room in quick strides, pulling her to her feet. There's been a development. What kind of development? Is Adrian? I can't explain here. We need to get you somewhere safe. His hand closed around her elbow, firm but not painful. Mrs. Volkov, I need you to trust me. Can you do that? Elena's mind raced. This could be a trap. Marcus could be working for Victor Castellano. Could be the inside man who'd fed information about Adrian's schedule. But the urgency in his voice, the way his eyes kept darting to the windows, that felt like genuine fear. And what did she have to lose anyway? If Adrian was really dead, nothing else mattered. All right, she said. Where are we going? Questions later. Move now. They went out through the kitchen, avoiding the main entrance. 2 more security guards fell in around them as they crossed to one of the SUVs. Elena barely registered the motion, her mind still stuck on Marcus's words. Development. Not confirmation. Not bodies recovered. Development. The drive took 20 minutes through darkened streets. They stopped at what looked like an abandoned office building on the edge of the warehouse district, close enough to the fire scene that Elena could smell smoke on the wind. Marcus led her inside and down a flight of stairs to a basement level. At the end of a dim hallway, he knocked twice on a reinforced door. It opened. And there, backlit by fluorescent lighting, covered in soot and blood, but very much alive, stood Adrian. Elena's knees buckled. She would have hit the concrete floor if Marcus hadn't caught her. Easy, he murmured. You're all right. He's all right. But Elena couldn't process his words, couldn't think past the roaring in her ears. Adrian was alive, moving toward her with quick strides, his face a mask of concern, his hands, still warm, still real, coming up to frame her face. Elena, breathe, I need you to breathe. She gasped in air like a drowning person breaking the surface. You're dead. They said, the fire. I know what they said. Adrian pulled her against his chest, and Elena felt the solid reality of him. Heartbeat, warmth, the rise and fall of his breathing. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. We had to make them think it worked. Make who think? Elena pulled back enough to look at him properly. Blood streaked his face from a cut above his eyebrow. His shirt was torn and blackened, but his eyes were alert, alive, furious. Adrian, what's happening? Victor Castellano set a trap. He had explosives rigged throughout the warehouse. We knew it was coming, had intel suggesting he planned something, but we needed him to think he'd succeeded. Adrian's hands moved to her shoulders, steadying her. So I let him think he'd won. The pieces started coming together in Elena's mind. You faked your death. Not exactly. The explosion was real. The fire is real. But we got out through a service tunnel before the main charges went off. Left behind evidence suggesting we'd been caught in the blast. Blood samples, personal effects. Enough to make Victor confident. Why? Elena's voice rose despite herself. Why let everyone think you're dead? Why not just... Because we needed to draw out his entire network. This came from a new voice. Elena turned to find Dmitry Kozlov stepping out of the shadows, looking grim. Victor Castellano has been a problem for all of us for years. Too smart, too careful, too well protected to take down directly. But Adrian had an idea. Adrian's jaw tightened. If Victor thought he'd eliminated me, he'd get cocky, start claiming credit, moving to absorb my territories, exposing his full network of allies and assets. We've had surveillance teams tracking every communication since the explosion. In 3 hours, we've identified 16 key players in his organization that we didn't know about before. So this was the plan. Elena felt something hot and dangerous rising in her chest. You planned to fake your death, and you didn't tell me? I couldn't risk it. If your grief wasn't genuine, Victor's people might have suspected. We needed everyone to believe. Elena's hand cracked across Adrian's face before she even registered the intention to strike. The sound echoed in the small room, and Adrian's head snapped to the side. Silence. Then Adrian turned back to her, a red mark blooming on his cheek. I deserved that. You deserved worse. Elena's voice shook with fury. I thought you were dead. I thought... Her breath hitched. Someone called me, said you were gone, that I was next. I sat in that house thinking you'd broken your promise, thinking I'd never see you again, never get to tell you. She stopped, the words catching in her throat. Tell me what? Adrian asked quietly. Elena shook her head, tears finally spilling over. All the shock and grief and terror of the past hours came flooding out in great heaving sobs that she couldn't control. Adrian pulled her close despite her half-hearted attempts to push him away, holding her while she shattered against his chest. I'm sorry, he murmured into her hair. I'm so sorry, Elena. I thought I was protecting you. If I'd told you the plan, you'd have been in danger. Victor's people could have taken you, tortured the truth out of you. This was the only way to keep you safe. I don't want to be safe if it means thinking you're dead, Elena choked out. I don't want protection if the price is that kind of pain. Adrian's arms tightened around her. I know. I understand that now, but Elena, you need to understand something too. Victor Castellano is still out there, and now that he thinks I'm dead, he's going to move fast, which means the danger for you just increased exponentially. Elena pulled back, swiping at her tears. What do you mean? Victor knows you matter to me. With me gone, you're his loose end, someone who knows too much, who could potentially testify against him if she wanted revenge for her dead husband. He'll send people for you. Let him. The words came out harder than Elena intended. I'm not afraid anymore. You should be. This came from Kozlov, who'd been watching their exchange with an unreadable expression. Victor Castellano doesn't take prisoners. He makes examples. Which is why we're moving you tonight, Adrian said. There's a safe house 2 hours north. You'll stay there with a full security detail until this is over. No. Elena stepped back out of Adrian's reach. No, I'm not running. I'm not hiding in some safe house while you clean up your mess. Elena, this isn't a discussion. You're right, it's not. She drew herself up to her full height, channeling every ounce of strength Sonia had been drilling into her. For 5 months, you kept me locked away like some precious object that might break. Then we agreed. No more hiding, no more treating me like I'm fragile. I'm not going back to that cage, Adrian, not even to stay safe. This is different. Victor thinks you're dead, which means he's not expecting any resistance from your organization. He certainly isn't expecting your widow to cause problems. Elena's mind raced, an idea taking shape. What if we use that? Adrian's eyes narrowed. Use what? Me. My grief. The pieces clicked into place with sudden clarity. Victor will expect me to fall apart. Maybe try to sell off your assets, flee the city. What if instead I appear to be doing exactly that? Set up a meeting, claim I want to negotiate selling your territories to avoid a war, get him in the open. Absolutely not. Adrian's voice went cold. You're not dangling yourself as bait. Why not? You just did. That's different. I'm better equipped, more experienced, actually expendable. Elena crossed her arms. I've been training with Sonia for weeks. I know how to defend myself. And I have something you don't. Victor's complete underestimation of me. He sees me as a trophy wife, a pretty accessory. He'll never expect me to be dangerous. Kozlov made a sound that might have been approval. The girl has a point. Stay out of this, Adrian snapped, then turned back to Elena. It's too risky. If anything went wrong, then you do what you do best. Adapt, plan, win. Elena stepped closer, placing her hand on his chest over his heart. You told me weeks ago that getting close to you was dangerous. I chose it anyway. Don't take away my choice now. For a long moment, Adrian just stared at her, a dozen emotions warring in his expression. Finally, he looked at Kozlov. Give us the room. The older man nodded, gesturing for Marcus and the other guards to follow him out. When the door closed, leaving them alone, Adrian caught Elena's face between his hands. You're terrified, he said softly. I can feel you shaking. Yes, but I'm doing it anyway. Elena covered his hands with hers. You promised me honesty, transparency, a real partnership that can't just apply when it's convenient. Either you trust me to be part of this or you don't. I trust you. That's not the issue. Then what is? I can't lose you. The words came out rough, almost broken. Elena, I've lost everyone I've ever cared about. My parents, my mentor, colleagues I trusted. I built walls to keep from caring again because caring means vulnerability. And then you walked into my life and dismantled every defense I had. If Victor Castellano took you from me, if you died because I let you put yourself at risk, I wouldn't survive it. Elena's breath caught. In all their conversations, all their intimate moments, Adrian had never been this raw, this openly afraid. You won't lose me, she said firmly. We'll be smart. We'll plan carefully, and we'll do it together, the way we're supposed to. But Adrian, I need you to hear this. I can't live in a cage anymore. Not even a golden one. Not even to keep me safe. I'd rather die taking risks than spend the rest of my life wrapped in bubble wrap. He closed his eyes, his forehead coming to rest against hers. You're going to be the death of me. Or we'll be the death of Victor Castellano together. Elena pulled back enough to meet his gaze. What's it going to be? Adrian studied her face for a long moment, and Elena saw the exact instant he capitulated. The tension in his shoulders eased fractionally, and something that might have been pride flickered in his eyes. All right, he said. We do this your way, but with conditions. What conditions? Full security detail. You don't go anywhere without at least 3 guards. You wear a tracker at all times. And if I say abort, you abort. No arguments, no hesitation. Agreed? Agreed. Elena rose on her toes, pressing a quick kiss to his mouth. Now tell me the plan. They spent the next hour in the basement safe house, Adrian and Kozlov laying out the details of what they'd learned about Victor's organization. Elena listened carefully, asking questions when something didn't make sense, offering observations that occasionally made both men pause and reconsider their approach. It felt good to be included, to be treated as a partner rather than a piece of furniture to be protected, and watching Adrian work, seeing the tactical brilliance that had made him king of the city's underworld, Elena understood for the first time the full scope of the man she'd married. Victor will be expecting contact from someone in your organization, Kozlov was saying, tracing connections on a map spread across the table. But he won't be expecting it from Elena. That gives us an advantage. We'll need to make it look organic, Adrian said, like she's reached out in desperation, not as part of a plan. Victor's paranoid. Anything too convenient will spook him. What if I go through an intermediary? Elena suggested. Someone he'd expect me to trust. My father, maybe? Adrian's expression darkened. Your father is unpredictable, and he has a history of making terrible decisions under pressure, which is exactly why Victor would believe it. Elena leaned forward, warming to the idea. Think about it. Gregor's desperate, always has been. If his daughter, now a wealthy widow, asked him to broker a meeting with Victor to sell off assets quickly and quietly, wouldn't that seem exactly like something he'd do? Kozlov nodded slowly. The girl is right. It has the ring of authenticity. I don't like involving him, Adrian said flatly. He's a liability. He's also my father, and he owes me. Elena's voice went hard. If he wants to make up for gambling my life away, this is his chance. Adrian looked at her for a long moment, and Elena saw him weighing options, calculating risks. Finally, he nodded. All right, but we control the information he receives. He knows only what he needs to know to be convincing. Agreed. He worked out the details. The story Gregor would tell, the meeting location that would seem random but give Adrian's team tactical advantage, the timeline that would seem rushed enough to be believable. By the time they finished, dawn was lightening the sky outside the small basement windows. "You should get some rest," Adrian said, noticing Elena's exhaustion. "We've got a long few days ahead." "I'm not tired." It was a lie, and they both knew it. Elena's body felt like it was held together with string and stubbornness. Adrian's mouth quirked in something almost like amusement. "Liar, come on." He led her to a small room at the back of the basement, barely more than a closet with a cot and a single lamp. Not exactly luxury, but Elena was too drained to care. She sank onto the cot, and Adrian settled beside her, his arm coming around her shoulders. They sat in silence for a moment. Then Elena said quietly, "I need to tell you something." "What?" "When I thought you were dead, when Marcus told me about the explosion," she stopped, gathering courage. "The worst part wasn't thinking I'd lost you. It was knowing I'd never told you that I love you." Adrian went very still. "Elena, let me finish." She turned to face him, taking his hand. "I know this started as a transaction. I know neither of us chose this. But somewhere between the courthouse and tonight, I fell in love with you. Not the version you show the world, not the crime lord or the ruthless businessman. You. The man who leaves flowers in my studio and smiles when he thinks no one's watching and reads philosophy at 3 a.m. when he can't sleep. How did you know about the 3 a.m. reading? I hear you sometimes, moving around in your office when I'm working late." Elena squeezed his hand. "I'm telling you now because I can't go through another night thinking you might die without knowing. I love you, Adrian Volkov, and I need you to come back to me when this is over." For a moment, Adrian didn't respond. Then he cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs brushing away tears she hadn't realized she was crying. "I love you too," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "I've loved you since that night in the library when you called me out for being condescending. Maybe even before that. You terrify me, Elena. The power you have to destroy me if something happens to you, it's absolute, but I wouldn't trade it. I wouldn't trade you." He kissed her then, and Elena tasted salt from both their tears. When they finally broke apart, Adrian pulled her down onto the narrow cot, holding her against his chest. "Sleep," he murmured. "I'll keep watch. You need rest too." "I'll rest when you're safe." Elena wanted to argue, but exhaustion was pulling at her like a tide. Her eyes drifted closed, and she felt Adrian's hand stroking her hair, heard his heartbeat steady and strong beneath her ear. She slept. When Elena woke, sunlight streamed through the high window and Adrian was gone. Panic spiked through her before she saw the note on the small table. "Meeting with the team. Back in an hour. Stay put. I love you." The last 3 words made her chest ache in the best way. Elena used the tiny bathroom to clean up as best she could, then ventured out into the main room of the safe house. Marcus stood guard by the door, and he nodded respectfully when he saw her. "Mrs. Volkov, Mr. Volkov left instructions that you're not to leave this floor." "I won't. Is there coffee?" "Kitchen's through there." He gestured to a doorway. "Mrs. Chen sent supplies over this morning." Of course she did. Even in crisis, the housekeeper maintained perfect efficiency. Elena found coffee and toast, forcing herself to eat despite her nervous stomach. Today, they'd contact her father, set the trap in motion. And in a few days, if everything went according to plan, Victor Castellano would walk right into it. And if things went wrong, a lot of people would die, including possibly her. The thought should have terrified her. Weeks ago, it would have. But Elena discovered she'd changed over the past months. The girl who'd walked into the courthouse in October, passive, resigned, willing to be a victim if it saved her father, that girl was gone. In her place stood someone harder, stronger, more willing to fight. Adrian returned an hour later as promised. With him came Kozlov and 3 other men Elena didn't recognize. They spread maps and surveillance photos across the table, and Adrian gestured for Elena to join them. "We've confirmed Victor is still in the city," he said without preamble. "He's already moving to claim territories he thinks are vulnerable with me gone, which means he's distracted, focused on expansion rather than security." "Perfect time to strike," one of the men said. Perfect time for Elena to make contact, Adrian corrected. We need him focused on her, believing she's a desperate widow, looking to salvage what she can. Gregor makes the initial approach today, sets up a preliminary meeting for tomorrow. Elena's pulse quickened. That fast? Victor will want to move quickly before any of my other lieutenants can organize. Speed works in our favor. Adrian's eyes met hers. You're sure about this? Completely. Then let's make the call. They used a burner phone, untraceable. Gregor answered on the third ring, his voice thick with sleep or possibly a hangover. Hello. Dad, it's Elena. She kept her voice shaky, grief-stricken, not hard when she remembered the terror of thinking Adrian was actually dead. I need your help. Lena? What's wrong? I heard about Adrian. I'm so sorry. I need you to do something for me. Can you do that? She didn't wait for an answer. I need you to contact Victor Castellano. Tell him I want to meet. Tell him I'm willing to negotiate selling Adrian's interests if he guarantees my safety. Silence on the other end. Then cautiously, Lena, that's a very dangerous game. I don't have a choice, Dad. Adrian's people are already circling and I don't trust any of them. Victor's the only one with enough power to keep me safe while I liquidate assets and get out of the city. She let her voice break. Please, you owe me this. Another pause, then Gregor sighed and Elena heard the guilt in that exhalation. All right, I'll make the call. Where can he reach you? She rattled off the number of another burner phone, one Adrian's team would monitor. Tell him I'll meet wherever he wants, whenever he wants. I just want this to be over. I'll do my best, sweetheart. And Lena, I really am sorry. About everything. I know, Dad. For once, she believed it. Thank you. She hung up and looked at Adrian. Now we wait. Victor called 4 hours later. Elena answered with trembling hands, very aware of Adrian and the others listening to every word through the surveillance equipment. Mrs. Volkov. Victor's voice was smooth, sympathetic. I was saddened to hear about your husband's death. Such a tragedy. Thank you. Elena injected just the right amount of grief and fear into her tone. Mr. Castellano, I'll be direct. I need help. So your father indicated you want to sell your late husband's interests. I want to survive. Adrian's people, they're not loyal to me. They see me as a weakness, an opportunity. I need someone powerful enough to keep them at bay while I transfer assets and leave the city. My father suggested you might be willing to help. For the right price. Very practical. She could hear the smile in Victor's voice. I appreciate a woman who understands business. What exactly are you offering? Adrian's Eastern port operations, the shipping routes, the distribution network, the political connections, all of it, in exchange for protection and 10% of the value. 10% seems generous on your part. Well, 10% of something is better than 100% of nothing, which is what I'll have if one of Adrian's lieutenants decides a dead wife is more convenient than a living one. Victor laughed, a sound like grinding gears. I like you, Mrs. Volkov. You're smarter than your husband gave you credit for. All right, let's meet. Tomorrow evening, 7 o'clock. There's a restaurant on 5th and Madison, Luciano's. Do you know it? Elena's mind raced. Luciano's was public, crowded, seemingly safe, which meant it was probably anything but. I know it, she said. Come alone. Well, bring security if you must, but no more than 2 men. I'll have my people watching. Any sign of a setup and the deal is off. Understood? Understood. Excellent. I look forward to our meeting, Mrs. Volkov, and may I say, widowhood seems to suit you. You're far more formidable than I expected. The line went dead. Elena set down the phone, her hands shaking for real now. Adrian immediately crossed to her, pulling her into his arms. You were perfect, he murmured. He believes it. Because I was telling the truth, Elena said into his shoulder. About being terrified, about wanting to survive. The only lie was who I'm afraid of. We have 18 hours to prepare, Kozlov said, already studying maps of the restaurant and surrounding area. This is doable. Difficult, but doable. The rest of the day blurred into planning sessions and contingency discussions. Adrian's team scouted Luciano's, identifying entry and exit points, security camera blind spots, positions for their own people. Elena tried on several outfits before settling on a simple black dress, widow's clothing that would sell the grief story while allowing freedom of movement. Sonia appeared late in the afternoon to run through self-defense scenarios one more time. Remember, the compact woman said as Elena practiced breaking holds, your greatest weapon is that he underestimates you. Use it. Let him think you're weak right up until the moment you're not. That night, Elena lay in Adrian's arms in the narrow cot, neither of them sleeping. Tell me what happens tomorrow, she said quietly. The real plan, not the sanitized version. Adrian was silent for a moment. Then he said, you go in with Marcus and Sonia as your security. They'll be armed, but discreet. I'll already be inside along with 6 others, all positioned to look like regular diners. Kozlov will have teams outside covering all exits. When you give the signal, what signal? You'll know it when the moment comes. When you give the signal, we take Victor and anyone with him into custody. Fast, clean, minimal collateral damage. And if something goes wrong, then you run. Marcus and Sonia get you out and we handle Victor. His arms tightened around her. But nothing will go wrong. I won't let it. You can't promise that. Watch me. Elena turned in his arms, studying his face in the darkness. I meant what I said earlier. I love you. I know. He kissed her forehead, her cheeks, finally her mouth. I love you too, which is why you're going to survive tomorrow. We both are. And then we're going to build the life we should have had from the beginning. What kind of life? One where I take you to dinner like a normal couple, where we wake up together every morning because we want to, not because a contract says we have to, where you paint your flowers and I run legitimate businesses and we're boring and happy. Elena smiled against his mouth. That sounds perfect. It will be. I promise. They made love then, slow and tender, each touch a promise and a prayer. And when Elena finally slept, wrapped in Adrian's warmth, she dreamed of a future where the danger was past, and all that remained was the love they'd fought so hard to build. Tomorrow would bring Victor Castellano and all the risks that entailed. But tonight, she had this, had Adrian's heartbeat beneath her ear and his whispered words of love in the darkness. It would have to be enough. Morning came too quickly, pale light filtering through the basement window and pulling Elena from restless sleep. Adrian was already awake, watching her with an intensity that made her breath catch. How long have you been staring at me? She asked softly. Long enough to memorize every detail. His hand came up to trace her cheekbone. In case I need the memory later. Don't talk like that. Elena caught his hand, pressing a kiss to his palm. We're both walking out of this, remember? I remember. But the shadow in his eyes suggested he was preparing for other possibilities, too. They rose and went through the motions of preparation. Coffee that tasted like ash, toast that sat heavy in Elena's stomach, the careful ritual of checking weapons and communication devices. Marcus ran through the plan one more time while Sonia helped Elena conceal a small blade in the lining of her purse. Last resort only, Sonia reminded her. You're not there to fight. You're there to sell the story and get Victor comfortable enough to incriminate himself. And if he tries something before Adrian can intervene, then you use everything I taught you and you get out. Sonia's expression was fierce. You're stronger than you think, Elena. Trust yourself. By 6 o'clock, Elena was dressed in the widow's black, her hair pulled back in a simple twist, minimal makeup that made her look pale and grief-stricken. She studied herself in the small mirror and barely recognized the woman looking back. No longer the frightened girl from the courthouse, but not quite the confident partner she was still learning to be. Someone in between. Someone discovering her own strength. Adrian appeared in the doorway, and his expression when he saw her made Elena's chest tighten. Pain and pride and fear all mixed together in those winter storm eyes. You look perfect, he said quietly. Exactly like a widow who's terrified and desperate. I am terrified. Elena turned to face him. But not for the reasons Victor thinks. He crossed to her, taking her face in his hands with devastating gentleness. I will be in that restaurant. I will be watching every second. And at the first sign of trouble, I'm pulling you out. Victor be damned. No. Elena placed her hands over his. We stick to the plan. This is our chance to end him, to eliminate the threat. If you pull me out early, he'll go underground and we'll spend the rest of our lives looking over our shoulders. Better that than losing you. You won't lose me. She rose on her toes, kissing him hard. I'm coming back to you. We both are. And then we're going to have that boring, happy life you promised. Adrian's arms came around her, holding her so tightly she could barely breathe. They stayed that way for a long moment, drawing strength from each other. Then Marcus knocked softly on the doorframe. It's time. The drive to Luciano's took 15 minutes through evening traffic. Elena sat in the back of the SUV between Marcus and Sonia, her hands folded in her lap to keep them from shaking. Adrian was in a separate vehicle with Kozlov, already en route to the restaurant where they'd enter separately and take up positions. You remember the signal? Marcus asked as they pulled up to the curb half a block from Luciano's. I remember. When Elena was ready for Adrian's team to move, she would reach for her water glass with her left hand instead of her right. Simple, natural, invisible to anyone not watching for it. They walked the half block to the restaurant, Sonia slightly ahead, Marcus at Elena's right shoulder. The street was busy with evening diners and theater goers, normal people living normal lives, completely unaware that two of the city's most dangerous men were about to clash. Luciano's was exactly as advertised, upscale Italian, dim lighting, white tablecloths, and candles. The maitre d' greeted them with professional warmth. Reservation for Volkov, Elena said, her voice steady despite the hammering of her heart. Of course, Mrs. Volkov. Right this way. He led them to a corner booth with good sight lines to the entrance and the rest of the dining room. As Elena slid into the leather seat, her eyes swept the space, cataloging familiar faces. Adrian sat 3 tables away, his back to her, appearing absorbed in conversation with a woman Elena recognized as one of Kozlov's people. 2 more of Adrian's team occupied the bar. Another pair sat near the kitchen entrance. Victor Castellano hadn't arrived yet. Wine, Mrs. Volkov? The waiter appeared with menus. Just water, please. She needed to stay sharp, focused. Minutes ticked by with agonizing slowness. Elena forced herself to breathe evenly, to maintain the appearance of a nervous widow, rather than a woman walking a tightrope between victory and disaster. Marcus and Sonia flanked her in the booth, alert but trying to appear casual. At 7:15, Victor arrived. He swept through the entrance with the confidence of a man who owned the world, flanked by 4 men in expensive suits that couldn't quite hide the weapons beneath. Victor himself was exactly as Elena remembered from the dinner party weeks ago. Silver hair, broad shoulders, that unsettling smile that never reached his eyes. He spotted her immediately and made his way to the booth, dismissing the maitre d' with a gesture. Mrs. Volkov. He extended his hand. Thank you for meeting me. Elena forced herself to take it, to endure the brief contact. Mr. Castellano, I appreciate your willingness to consider my proposal. Please call me Victor. He gestured for his men to take up positions around the restaurant, 2 at the bar, 1 near the entrance, 1 by the restrooms. May I sit? Of course. Victor settled into the booth opposite her, his bulk making the space feel suddenly smaller. Up close, Elena could see the calculation in his eyes, the predatory assessment. He was measuring her, trying to determine if she was genuinely desperate or playing a deeper game. She needed to convince him it was the former. I won't waste your time with pleasantries, Victor said, signaling the waiter for scotch. Your father indicated you want to sell your late husband's Eastern operations. That's a significant asset. Why come to me rather than negotiate with Adrian's existing lieutenants? Because Adrian's lieutenants see me as an obstacle, Elena replied, letting her voice shake slightly. I'm not one of them. I don't have their respect or their loyalty. The moment Adrian died, I became expendable, probably dangerous, given what I know about his business. And what do you know, Mrs. Volkov? Enough to be a threat, not enough to run his empire. Elena leaned forward, selling the desperation. I'm not stupid, Victor. I know how this works. A widow with knowledge but no power is a liability. So I'm offering you what you want, access to the eastern ports, in exchange for protection and enough money to disappear. Victor studied her, his fingers drumming on the table. You understand that if I agree to this, you can never return to the city. You'd be giving up your home, your life here. What life? I was merchandise bought to settle a debt. Adrian's dead. There's nothing keeping me here. The bitterness in her voice was only partially feigned. Even knowing Adrian was alive, sitting across from the man who'd tried to kill him made rage simmer beneath Elena's careful composure. I see. Victor accepted his scotch from the waiter, took a slow sip. And how do I know this isn't a setup? That your grief-stricken widow act isn't cover for something else? Elena's pulse spiked. This was the moment. Convince him or lose everything. Because I'm terrified, she said simply, letting the truth bleed into her words. Look at me, Victor. Really look. Do I seem like someone playing games? I'm alone. I'm scared, and I just want to survive. If you don't help me, one of Adrian's people will kill me within a week. You'd be doing me a favor by making this deal. Silence stretched between them. Elena held Victor's gaze, letting him see the fear that was genuine even if the reasons for it weren't what he thought. Finally, he smiled. You're either the smartest woman I've ever met or the most desperate. I'm inclined to believe the latter. Relief flooded through her. Then we have a deal? Perhaps. First, I need details. The shipping routes, the distribution networks, the political contacts. I want to know exactly what I'm buying. I have files, documents, everything Adrian kept on his operations. They're in a safe deposit box at First National Bank. I can get them to you tomorrow. Why not tonight? Because the bank is closed, and I'm not stupid enough to keep that kind of information at the house where any of Adrian's people could find it. Elena let irritation creep into her voice. Do you want to do this deal or not? Victor's smile widened. I like you, Mrs. Volkov. You've got spine. All right, tomorrow. But I want those files by noon, and I want you to walk me through every connection, every contact. If anything seems off, the deal is over and you're on your own. Understood. Elena reached for her water glass and deliberately used her right hand, taking a sip before setting it down. Not yet. She needed more. And the money? 10% of the Eastern Operations annual revenue. Approximately $8 million transferred to an offshore account of your choosing. Once I verify the information you're providing is accurate. $8 million. Enough to disappear, to build a new life. If Elena actually were the desperate widow she was pretending to be, it would be a fortune. That seems fair, she said carefully. Excellent. Then let's discuss the logistics. Victor's phone buzzed. He glanced at it, his expression darkening. Then he looked up at Elena, and something in his eyes changed. Tell me, Mrs. Volkov, he said slowly, his voice dropping to something dangerous. If you're so desperate to leave the city, why did one of my men just report seeing Adrian Volkov's personal driver 3 blocks from here? Elena's blood turned to ice. How had they... I don't know what you're talking about, she said, but Victor was already signaling his men. I think you do. He leaned forward, all pretense of civility gone. I think you've been playing me from the beginning. I think your grieving widow act is exactly that, an act. Which means Adrian isn't dead, is he? That's insane. I watched the warehouse burn. You watched a warehouse burn. Doesn't mean your husband was in it. Victor's hand moved inside his jacket. Clever plan, I'll admit. Fake his death, draw me out, have his pretty wife set a trap. Almost worked, too. But I didn't survive this long by trusting desperate women with convenient solutions. Elena's mind raced. The signal. She needed to give the signal. But Victor's men were already moving, hands reaching for weapons, and if she made any sudden movement, Victor, please, she started, but he cut her off. Where is he? Where is Adrian Volkov? I don't... The crack of gunfire shattered the restaurant's ambiance. Everything happened at once. Victor's men drew weapons, diners screamed, and Adrian burst from his position 3 tables away, gun already firing. One of Victor's guards went down, then another. Marcus and Sonia flanked Elena, creating a barrier with their bodies as chaos erupted. Get her out, Adrian shouted, and Marcus was already moving, pulling Elena from the booth. But Victor was faster than he looked. His hand shot out, catching Elena's wrist with crushing force, yanking her back against his chest. She felt the cold press of a gun barrel against her temple. Nobody moves, Victor's voice boomed over the screaming. Or the widow becomes the real widow, right after I paint the walls with her brains. The restaurant froze. Adrian stood 10 feet away, his weapon trained on Victor, his face a mask of fury and fear. Around them, the remaining diners cowered beneath tables while Victor's surviving men and Adrian's team held their positions in tense standoff. "Let her go, Victor." Adrian's voice was deadly calm. "This is between us."
Is it? Because it seems to me your wife is the one who walked into my meeting under false pretenses.
The one who tried to play me. Victor's arm tightened around Elena's throat, making breathing difficult. "Tell me, Adrian, and I know you're there, hiding behind your theatrical death. How much is she worth to you? Enough to surrender?" "Don't!" Elena gasped. "Don't you dare!" "Quiet." Victor pressed the gun harder against her temple. "I'm talking to your husband."
Adrian, what's it going to be?
"Walk away and let me kill her, or surrender, and maybe I let her live." Elena saw the calculation in Adrian's eyes, saw him measuring odds and angles, and she knew with absolute certainty that he was about to do something stupid, something noble and self-destructive like trading himself for her. She couldn't let that happen. Sonia's training kicked in like muscle memory. Elena went limp, dead weight in Victor's arms, and his grip loosened fractionally as he adjusted to her sudden collapse. In that half second of distraction, Elena drove her elbow back hard into his ribs, felt something crack, and dropped to the floor as his gun discharged into the space where her head had been. Then Adrian was moving, closing the distance in 2 strides, and his fist connected with Victor's jaw with a sound like breaking concrete. The older man staggered, and Adrian hit him again, and again, fury unleashed. "Adrian, stop!" Kozlov's voice cut through the violence. "We need him alive!" Adrian froze, his fist cocked back for another blow, breathing hard. Victor sagged against the booth, blood streaming from his nose and mouth. Around them, the standoff had resolved. Victor's remaining men disarmed and restrained by Adrian's superior numbers, police sirens wailing in the distance. Elena pushed herself up on shaking arms. Marcus was instantly there, helping her to her feet, checking her for injuries. "I'm okay," she managed. "I'm okay." Adrian turned to her, and the raw emotion on his face nearly undid her. He crossed the space between them in quick strides, pulling her into his arms with desperate strength. "You could have died," he said roughly. "That was incredibly stupid and brave. And necessary," Elena finished. "He was going to make you surrender. I couldn't let that happen. I would have traded myself for you in a heartbeat." "I know. That's why I didn't give you the chance." She pulled back enough to meet his eyes. "We're partners, remember? That means I protect you too." Kozlov appeared, looking grimly satisfied despite the carnage. "Police are 2 minutes out. Victor's men are cooperating, already offering to testify in exchange for reduced sentences. This is over, Adrian. You won." "We won," Adrian corrected, his arm tightening around Elena. "None of this works without her." The police arrived in a flood of uniforms and questions. Adrian had apparently anticipated this part too, producing documentation, explaining the situation in terms that made Victor the aggressor and Adrian's team the victims acting in self-defense. Phone calls were made to contacts in the district attorney's office, to politicians who owed Adrian favors, to lawyers who could navigate the complicated aftermath. Elena watched it all from the sidelines, wrapped in a blanket someone had draped over her shoulders, as the man she loved orchestrated the destruction of his enemy through legitimate channels. This was power of a different kind. Not guns and violence, but influence and connections, the ability to make the system work in his favor. Hours later, they finally made it back to the safe house. Victor was in custody, facing charges for attempted murder, racketeering, and a dozen other crimes his cooperating associates had detailed. His organization was being dismantled piece by piece by law enforcement, grateful for the opportunity to take down such a significant target. It was over. Elena sank onto the narrow cot, exhaustion crashing over her like a wave. Adrian settled beside her, his arm coming around her shoulders. "We should go home," he said quietly. "The real home. No more hiding." "In a minute." Elena leaned into his warmth. "I just need a minute." They sat in silence, processing everything that had happened. Then Adrian said, "That move you pulled, dropping and striking simultaneously, that was perfect execution of what Sonia taught you. I had good teachers. You had courage." He pressed a kiss to her temple. "Most people would have frozen. You attacked. I couldn't let him hurt you, or use me to hurt you, Whatever it took to prevent that, I was willing. Elena tilted her head to look at him. Is that how you felt? All this time, trying to keep me safe. Every second of every day since that night in my study when I realized I was in love with you. Adrian's hand found hers, their fingers interlacing. It's terrifying, loving someone this much, knowing they could be taken away. But they weren't. I'm still here. We both are. Elena squeezed his hand. And now Victor's in custody, his organization is destroyed, and we get to go home. Really home. Not as strangers fulfilling a contract, but as husband and wife who chose each other, Adrian finished. As partners who've earned the right to that boring, happy life. They went home the next morning. The mansion felt different as they walked through the entrance together. Not the cold prison it had been for those first 5 months, but simply a house. Walls and marble and expensive art that was just backdrop for the life they'd built inside it. Mrs. Chen greeted them with barely concealed relief, and if she noticed that Elena's belongings were already consolidated on the second floor in Adrian's quarters, she said nothing. Just welcomed them home and assured them that everything had been maintained perfectly in their absence. Over the next weeks, Elena watched as Adrian systematically dismantled the criminal aspects of his empire. Victor's arrest had created a power vacuum, and rather than fill it, Adrian stepped back. He negotiated deals with law enforcement, providing information on trafficking networks and corruption in exchange for immunity for his own past activities. The eastern ports he'd fought so hard to control were sold to legitimate shipping companies. The political connections were severed. I'm done, he told Elena one night as they reviewed the final contracts. No more gray areas, no more justifying violence as business. Victor's people killed 4 civilians in that restaurant. I won't be responsible for that kind of collateral damage anymore. What will you do instead? Adrian gestured to the document spread across his desk. I own 17 legitimate businesses, tech companies, real estate holdings, investment firms. More than enough to maintain this lifestyle without the blood. He looked at her. Is that enough? Can you live with a man who spent the past 15 years building an empire on crime, even if he walks away from it now? Elena thought of the girl who'd signed her name on a marriage certificate to save her father, who'd spent 5 months in isolated misery, who'd slowly learned that the monster she'd married was also a man capable of love and change. I can live with a man who chooses to be better, she said, who makes the hard decision to change, even when it costs him power. That's who you are now, Adrian, not who you were. Relief and love flooded his expression. He pulled her into his arms, holding her like she might disappear. I don't deserve you. Probably not, but you're stuck with me anyway. They married again in June, a real wedding this time, not a courthouse transaction, but an actual ceremony in the estate gardens Elena had helped design. The guest list was small. Kozlov and a few of Adrian's associates who'd made the same transition to legitimate business, Mrs. Chen and the household staff who'd witnessed their journey, Sonia, who'd become an unexpected friend. Even Gregor attended, sober for the occasion, his eyes wet as he watched his daughter marry the same man for the second time, under vastly different circumstances. I'm proud of you, he whispered when he walked her down the makeshift aisle between rows of chairs set up on the lawn. For surviving, for becoming stronger than I ever was. I learned from your mistakes, Elena replied, not unkindly. Use them to make better choices. That's all a father can hope for. Adrian waited at the end of the aisle in a perfectly tailored suit, his eyes locked on Elena like she was the only person in the world. When she reached him, he took her hands in his, and this time the words they spoke were promises they chose freely. I love you, Adrian said, his voice carrying across the garden. I loved you when I was too much of a coward to admit it. I love you now with everything I am, and I'll love you every day for the rest of our lives. I love you too, Elena replied, her throat tight with emotion. You bought my hand, but you earned my heart, and I'm choosing to give it to you, freely and completely, for as long as we both shall live. They kissed as husband and wife, really, truly married this time, and the small gathering applauded. The reception lasted into the evening, champagne and dancing under lights strung between the trees. Elena waltzed with her husband under the stars and felt the last remnants of the frightened girl from October finally fade away, replaced by the woman she'd fought to become. Life settled into a new rhythm over the following months. Adrian threw himself into his legitimate businesses with the same intensity he'd once brought to criminal enterprises and proved to be just as successful operating within the law. Elena continued her botanical illustration work, her client list growing as word spread about her talent. They traveled, real vacations to places where no one knew Adrian Volkov's reputation, where they could be just another couple enjoying foreign cities and lazy beach days. They learned to cook together, badly, and ordered takeout while laughing at their culinary disasters. They adopted a massive rescue dog named Bear, who thought he was a lapdog despite weighing 90 pounds. They built the boring, happy life Adrian had promised, and it was everything. One October evening, exactly 1 year after their courthouse wedding, Elena sat in her studio working on an illustration of autumn crocus when Adrian appeared in the doorway. "I have something for you," he said, crossing the room to place a small box on her work table. Elena set down her brush, studying him with suspicion. "My birthday isn't for 2 months." "I know. Just open it." Inside the box was a key, old-fashioned, brass, the kind that opened antique locks. Elena turned it over in her fingers, confused. "It's the key to your old apartment," Adrian explained quietly. "The building was being converted to condos. I bought your unit. Had it restored exactly as you left it. Same furniture, same paint on the walls, even the same coffee mug you used to leave on the counter." Elena's breath caught. "Why?" "Because I took your life from you. Your home, your independence, your choices. I can't give back the year we lost, but I can give you back the space that was yours. A place that's completely separate from me, from this house, from everything we've built together. Somewhere you can go when you need to remember who you were before I bought you." Tears blurred Elena's vision. She stood, crossing to him, taking his face in her hands. "I don't need to remember who I was before. That girl was half-formed, hiding from life. You didn't take from me, Adrian. You challenged me to become more. Still, this is the most thoughtful gift anyone's ever given me." She kissed him softly. "Thank you. But I'm not going back to that apartment. That's not home anymore." "Where is home?" "Wherever you are." She pressed closer, feeling his arms come around her. "You're my home now. This house, this life, this partnership we've built from something that started as a transaction, that's home." Adrian held her tighter. "I love you so much it terrifies me." "Good. Stay terrified, keeps you honest." He laughed, the sound rich and warm, and Elena marveled at how far they'd come. From ice and distance to laughter and love, from strangers bound by contract to partners bound by choice. 3 months later, Elena stared at the plastic stick in her hand and watched 2 pink lines appear. Pregnant. She sat on the bathroom floor, her mind reeling. They'd talked about children someday, in that vague future way couples did when building their lives together. But someday had arrived faster than expected, and suddenly the theoretical became very, very real. A child. Adrian's child. Her child. Their child. Terror and joy warred in her chest. She thought of all the ways this could go wrong, the dangers that might still lurk despite Victor's defeat, the challenges of raising a child in a world where Adrian's past might always cast shadows. But she also thought of Adrian's face when he talked about the future, the gentleness in his hands when he touched her, the capacity for love he'd discovered beneath all that ice. He would be a good father. She knew it with absolute certainty. Elena found Adrian in his office, reviewing contracts for a new tech acquisition. He looked up when she entered, and something in her expression made him set down his pen immediately. "What's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong." Elena crossed to him, placing the pregnancy test on his desk. "Everything's different, but nothing's wrong." Adrian stared at the test, his expression unreadable. Then he looked up at her, and Elena saw tears tracking down his face, the first time she'd ever seen him cry. "We're having a baby?" His voice broke on the words. "We're having a baby." He stood so fast his chair rolled backward, and then his arms were around her, lifting her off her feet, his face buried in her neck. Elena felt his shoulders shake and held him tighter, understanding that this meant more than she could fully grasp. Not just a child, but proof that he could create life as well as take it, that he could build a family instead of destroying one. "I'm terrified," he admitted when he finally set her down. "What if I'm terrible at this?
What if I can't protect them? What if we figure it out together, the same way we've figured out everything else? Elena placed her hand on his chest over his heart. You're not doing this alone, Adrian. We're partners, remember? Partners, he repeated, his hand covering hers. And parents. And parents. The pregnancy was difficult. Elena suffered from severe morning sickness that lasted well into her second trimester, and her body rebelled against the changes in ways that sent her to bed rest for weeks at a time. Adrian became a different person during those months, hovering, overprotective, driving Elena crazy with his constant worry. I'm pregnant, not dying, she told him after he appeared with her third snack of the hour. I can walk to the kitchen myself. The doctor said to minimize stress and physical exertion. The doctor said to avoid heavy lifting, not movement entirely. Adrian, you can't bubble wrap me. But he tried anyway, hiring a team of specialists to monitor every aspect of the pregnancy, reading obstetrics textbooks like they were military strategy manuals, preparing the nursery with the same intensity he'd once brought to business deals. Elena found it simultaneously infuriating and endearing. Her father visited frequently, excitement about becoming a grandfather transforming him into someone almost unrecognizable. He'd gotten sober, found work managing a restaurant, started rebuilding his life. The change was tentative, fragile, but real. I want to be better, Gregor told Elena one afternoon as they sat in the garden, her hand resting on her swelling belly. For you, for my grandchild, I wasted so much time, made so many mistakes. I can't fix what I did to you, but I can try to be worthy of a second chance. You're doing the work, Elena said softly. That's what matters. Not the past, but what you choose now. I learned that from you, watching you take the worst situation and transform it into something beautiful that taught me change is possible. In her 8th month, complications arose. Preeclampsia, the doctors called it, dangerously high blood pressure that put both Elena and the baby at risk. She was hospitalized immediately, Adrian at her side every moment, his fear palpable. This is my fault, he said one night, holding her hand while machines beeped around them. The stress of the past year, everything you went through because of me. Stop, Elena squeezed his hand. This isn't anyone's fault. It's just something that happens sometimes, and we're going to get through it. You have to get through it. I can't. Elena, I can't lose you. You won't. She pulled him closer until his forehead rested against hers. I'm not going anywhere. I made you a promise in that garden last June, and I'm keeping it. For better or worse, remember? This is the worst part. We handle it together. The doctors decided to induce labor at 37 weeks, unwilling to risk waiting longer. Elena labored for 16 hours, Adrian beside her the entire time, holding her hand through every contraction, whispering encouragement when she was certain she couldn't continue. You're the strongest person I know, he told her as dawn broke outside the hospital window. You survived me. You survived Victor. You can survive this. I'm not surviving, Elena gasped between contractions. I'm actively dying. You're giving life. There's a difference. At 7:23 in the morning, Sofia Marie Volkov entered the world with a furious cry that announced her displeasure at the entire birth process. The nurses placed her on Elena's chest, and the world narrowed to that tiny red-faced creature with Adrian's dark hair and Elena's nose. She's perfect, Adrian whispered, his voice thick with tears. You're both perfect. Elena looked up at him, at this man who'd been ice and distance before learning to thaw, and saw their entire journey reflected in his face, the fear and love and desperate hope that they could give their daughter better than either of them had received. We're going to be good at this, she said softly. Not perfect, but good. How do you know? Because we know what not to do. We know what it feels like to be reduced to transactions and expectations. We won't do that to her. Adrian pressed a kiss to Elena's forehead, then to Sophia's tiny head. No, we won't. Recovery was slow. The preeclampsia had taken its toll, and Elena spent 2 weeks in the hospital before doctors cleared her to go home. Adrian barely left her side, dividing his time between Elena's room and the nursery where Sophia spent her first days getting stronger. When they finally brought their daughter home, the mansion that had once felt cold and empty
was transformed by the presence of one tiny human. Sophia cried and ate and slept in irregular cycles that left both parents exhausted and overwhelmed. Adrian changed diapers with the same focused intensity he brought to everything else, studying technique videos at 3 in the morning while Sophia screamed in the background. "I think she hates me," he said one particularly difficult night when Sophia refused to settle no matter what he did. "She doesn't hate you. She's 2 weeks old. She doesn't have complex emotions yet." Elena took the baby, swaying gently. "She's just expressing displeasure with the world in general." I can relate. Despite the exhaustion and the challenges, Elena had never been happier. Watching Adrian transform from crime lord to devoted father was a gift she hadn't known to hope for. He was patient with Sophia in ways he'd never been patient with anything else, gentle in ways that seemed impossible for hands that had dealt so much violence. Their daughter became the center of their universe, and they built their routines around her needs: late-night feedings and early morning wake-ups, the careful choreography of two people learning to be parents together. Months passed. Sophia grew from newborn to infant, developing her own personality, stubborn like her father, creative like her mother, possessing a laugh that could light up entire rooms. She learned to roll over, then to sit up, then to crawl with alarming speed toward anything dangerous. "She has no fear," Adrian observed one afternoon as he pulled Sophia away from the fireplace for the third time. "Where does she get that?" "From both of us," Elena replied. "You face down criminals. I face down you. She's doomed to be fearless." On Sophia's first birthday, they hosted a party in the garden, the same garden where they'd married for the second time. The guest list had grown: Kozlov and his family, Sonia and her partner, several of Adrian's colleagues from his legitimate businesses, even Gregor, who'd maintained his sobriety and brought an age-appropriate toy instead of something wildly expensive. Elena watched from Adrian's side as Sophia demolished her first birthday cake, smearing frosting everywhere with gleeful enthusiasm. This was her family now, not the one she'd been born into, but the one she'd built through survival and choice and the kind of love that grew from the most unlikely soil. "Happy?" Adrian asked, his arm around her waist. "Deliriously." Elena leaned into him. "You?" "More than I ever thought possible." He pressed a kiss to her temple. "Thank you." "For what?" "For surviving that first year, for giving me a chance when I didn't deserve one, for building this with me." He gestured to the party, to Sophia covered in cake, to the life they'd created. "For turning a contract into a family." Elena turned in his arms, rising on her toes to kiss him properly. "Best transaction I ever made." Years continued to pass, marked by Sophia's growth and the deepening of Elena and Adrian's partnership. The little girl who'd entered the world furious grew into a thoughtful child who inherited her mother's artistic talent and her father's strategic mind. She drew elaborate pictures and built complex block structures, narrated stories about her stuffed animals with the kind of dramatic flair that suggested future theatrical interests. Adrian's businesses thrived under his legitimate leadership, and he became known for aggressive but ethical practices, for deals that benefited all parties rather than crushing competition. The reputation he'd built through fear transformed into one built on respect, harder earned but more lasting. Elena's illustration work evolved too. She published her first book, a comprehensive guide to native flowering plants, that became a bestseller in botanical circles. She taught occasional workshops in the studio that had once been her only refuge, sharing her knowledge with aspiring artists who had no idea their instructor had once been bought to settle a debt. On their 5th anniversary, counting from the courthouse wedding, not the garden ceremony, they returned to the place where it all began. The courthouse looked exactly the same, still smelling of old paper and broken promises. "I was terrified that day," Elena said as they stood in the hallway outside Judge Morrison's chambers, "convinced my life was ending." "In a way it was," Adrian replied. "The life you'd planned, the future you'd imagined, all of it ended when you signed that certificate. But something better began." She took his hand. "I wouldn't change it, any of it. The fear and the distance and the slow thaw, it made us who we are." "Would you do it again if you knew everything that was coming?" Elena thought about the question seriously. The 5 months of isolation, the terror of thinking Adrian was dead, the complicated pregnancy,
The challenges of merging two damaged people into something whole. Yes, she said finally, I'd do it all again, because it led here, to us, to Sophia, to a life I didn't know I wanted until I fought for it.
Adrian pulled her close, and they stood in the courthouse hallway where their story began. No longer strangers bound by contract, but partners bound by choice, by love, by the family they'd built from the most unlikely beginning. The marriage that started made of ice had become something warm and living, something that grew stronger with each passing year. And if anyone had told Elena 5 years ago that the terrified girl signing her life away would become this woman, happy, strong, complete, she never would have believed them. But here she was. Here they were. And it was everything.